The main character was in great surprise when, upon entering the room, she saw many portraits, while the maid told her that she had gotten everything as requested. When the maid reported that she had collected every single portrait of the most handsome nobles of the empire, including blondes, brunettes, redheads, and guys with unusual hair colors, the heroine was even more amazed. When the exhausted girl asked if she had told her to bring portraits of only the most unsurpassed handsome men, the servant agreed and said that they had passed the strictest selection of unsurpassed handsome men. Beaming with happiness, the maid noted the surprising fact that even so many portraits remained, and no matter how many you choose, there is no end or edge. The servants were very surprised and frightened, so they immediately rushed towards her when their mistress, swaying from side to side, suddenly began to fall backwards. With tears in her eyes, the main character did not understand why there were so many uselessly handsome men, because she somehow had to find the male protagonists among them. Looking at her poor miss, who looked quite sick, the maid did not know what to say, and tears appeared in her eyes. With words that she should sit down quickly, the servant helped her mistress, noting that at this rate she would collapse with a fever again. Sitting down on the ottoman, our main character Jenna clenched her little fists, thinking that she needed to get it together. Having gained full determination, she realized that the most important thing for her now was to find male protagonists within 3 days by any means necessary. The main character, whose name is Jaina Este, is the daughter of a respectable count's family of the Visan Empire, and also a sickly beauty who faints at the slightest thing due to her chronic illness. All this is the only thing she knows about herself now, because she is the second time traveler who does not know what kind of novel or what position she ended up in. Before coming to this world, she lived in Seoul, Korea, and was an avid reader of romantic fantasy, having read over 1,000 novels, in which category she read everything without discrimination. Even if the girl had to name the novels of her entire life, she would not have enough fingers and toes. She only had 5 favorite heroes. That day a month ago, the heroine was browsing websites in search of the new romance of her life, and fell asleep only at dawn, as always. Her surprise knew no bounds when, opening her eyes, she saw in front of her a multitude of unfamiliar people who, having gathered around her, were very surprised. When she came to her senses, she realized that it was not only the people in front of her that were unfamiliar, and not only the ceiling, which reminded her of a palace, but also she herself. An ordinary person would have fainted when faced with something like this, but she, with N years of experience as a reader and having read over 1,000 novels, was not at a loss and quickly figured out the situation. While delighted that she had actually gotten into a novel, Jenna thought that getting into a novel would be a piece of cake for a fantasy novel lover. Her surprise and horror knew no bounds when, having found out at least some information about this world, she could not understand which of the novels she had ended up in. Continuing to wonder where she ended up, the heroine, ultimately disappointed, realized that with N years of experience as a reader, although she had read more than 1,000 novels, she simply could not remember all the events of each of them. Usually the time travelers, upon hearing the name of the empire or kingdom, immediately recognized where they had ended up, but Gina, clutching her head, could not understand why she did not have the memories that naturally surfaced in time travelers. The maid screamed in fear when her mistress, after telling her that in that case she should start from the basics, because one should not underestimate a fan of fantasy novels, suddenly fell backwards. The very next day, when the bright sun was shining high in the sky, the main character woke up and realized that she had fainted again. Getting up from the bed, she thought with bewilderment that she had no idea that a weak body could be so uncomfortable, because even going outside was scary. She was quite surprised and immediately pricked up her ears when, getting out of bed and going to the window, she heard the maids talking about her. Standing in the next room, she listened as the maids talked about how their poor Miss's illness was only getting worse, and the consequences were more serious, because she didn't even remember the name of their country. Hearing this, Jenna felt extremely awkward, because she knew perfectly well that these were not the consequences of the disease. At this time, the servants continued to talk about their mission, when suddenly one of them said that her heart sank with pain every time the miss smiled, because she knew nothing. The heroine was greatly perplexed when another maid, agreeing with these words, wondered how long the miss should live without even suspecting her own illness. Jenna stood rooted to the spot when she learned from the maid's conversation that their miss would not be able to live even 2 years due to an incurable disease. Remembering all those situations when she fainted, she could not believe that she was really so weak due to an incurable disease and would not live even 2 years, when suddenly something strange appeared behind her. Turning around and seeing the board in front of her, she couldn't understand what it was, when suddenly it, introducing itself as a fairy, greeted the heroine and noted that she finally learned about her situation. The heroine, with even greater bewilderment, began to ask who it was and whether he knew her, when that same board, having clarified that she had ended up in a novel and did not know its name, asked her not to worry, because she, a fairy, would help her enjoy the comfortable life of a traveler. When the fairy, noting that this was an excellent question, asked me to first pronounce my state, Jenna, having pronounced these words with incomprehension, saw a download in front of her. Not understanding what kind of fantasy system window it was, the main character was in great surprise when she saw in front of her that the health bar had a rating of 1 out of 100, and the fairy, having made sure that she saw it, said that the girl would soon die. Goosebumps of fear began to run through the heroine's body, when suddenly she began to scream about how it was possible to suddenly pull out a person who was living peacefully and now drag him into this. Her surprise knew no bounds when she suddenly developed a sudden cough, which prevented her from even finishing her sentence, and when she looked down she saw blood on her hands. When the girl fell to the floor with a tremor in her body, the fairy, asking if she wanted to check the quest that she had just received, clarified that, however, the moment she checked the quest, she would no longer be able to turn back. Sometime later, a girl named Lilith Trisha, who was also the daughter of Marquise Trisha and also a friend of Jaina, ran into the heroine's room with tears in her eyes. Running up to the heroine with a worried look, she began to ask her if she was okay, because she had heard from others that Jaina had fainted again. Noticing the girl, the heroine was quite surprised, and getting up from the sofa, she asked in surprise where she was from. Noting with a trembling voice that she had already thought that something terrible had happened to her, Lilith hugged the girl tightly, saying that she was very glad that she looked healthy. Smiling, hugging the girl, the heroine plunged into her thoughts, and, looking at the board, which said that the outcome of a failed mission would be death, she understood that something had happened. 3 days ago, she learned that the body she was in terminal pain and could die at any moment. When she suddenly vomited blood from the shocking news, an unknown quest window and contract appeared. After a message appeared on the window that a quest had appeared, and she was asked if she wanted to check it out, the girl, who was in great shock, had no choice but to agree. She was horrified when after this, on the window in front of her, it was reported that this world consisted of books that she had previously read, but however, a big problem had appeared in the world, and only she could solve it, and in case of failure, death awaited her. With tears in her eyes, she did not understand what was being discussed, because earlier the fairy told her that she would be able to survive if she pressed here, but ignoring her, the board only showed congratulations on the conclusion of the contract with a smiling emoticon. When Jenna, screaming loudly to remove those damn smileys, asked if the fairy was aware that this was an unfair contract, the board informed her that this was the only way she could survive. She was informed that her body was currently literally eluding death, and that she could meet an untimely end anywhere and at any time. She was in great bewilderment when, together with this, they added to her the words that all this would have happened if it had not been for this little precious fairy window. Suggesting that she should probably tell her about this place from the very beginning, the fairy informed her that, contrary to her guesses, this was not the world of any of the books she had read. But, to be more precise, it was a world created by mixing together the 4 novels she had read. Asking himself what would happen if the main character tried to reject his destiny, the story of the novel, the fairy clarified that 4 worlds and dozens of active lie were colliding here now. Noting that the stories were originally meant to collide separately from each other, the fairy clarified that time and space were mixed up, and the main characters evoke various errors of attitude, and even the clichés of each of the novels were mixed up. Jenna was quite surprised and didn't quite understand what was going on when she was informed that her role in all this was that of a rare conductor. She became thoughtful when she learned that it was not necessary for all the details to fall into place exactly as in the novel, and all she had to do was manage the process so that they did not deviate from the main development of events. Not understanding why and how, she began waving her arms in anger and shouted that the fairy should entrust such things to the main characters and not to a weak girl. She was surprised and closed her eyes from the bright light when the fairy, without even letting her finish speaking, said that these main characters were the guiding thread, after which bright rays of light flashed on her hand. Jenna was quite surprised and didn't quite understand what it was when she opened her eyes and saw something that looked like a smart watch on her hand. When the window showed information that the received item sends a signal when the main character is nearby, the fairy said that the moment she sees the main character, a hint will appear, with the help of which she can recognize that he is the main character. The heroine was shaking with anger when she realized that this bastard still wasn't listening to her, while he continued to talk about how, with the help of hints, she just needed to turn the story in accordance with how she knew it. Telling her not to worry, the fairy informed her that the more attempts she made to find the protagonist, the higher her energy would become, but she also had to be careful, because if she gave up or neglected her duties, the level would drop again. When the girl asked if she would be able to return home if she did everything, the fairy agreed and said that he would also fulfill any of her wishes. Looking in bewilderment at the board, which indicated in red that failure in this quest would result in her death, Gina could not understand whether this was a quest or a threat, after which her path in search of the main characters began. After some time, lying on the floor with tears in her eyes and a pile of scattered books near her, the heroine could not understand how she was supposed to find the main characters if she had no idea where they lived or what they did. She knew very well that in the world of love fantasy, there are heroes who have defeated the Demon King, the most beautiful princesses in the kingdom, and sometimes even the main characters are the devil father or the daughter of the traitor's cousin. When Jenna, already completely disappointed, thought that this was precisely why it was impossible to single out any features, a thought suddenly came to her mind. She suddenly realized that there was actually one absolute rule regarding the main male characters, and that was that they were all unusually handsome. So the heroine immediately began collecting portraits of handsome men from all over the empire. Standing in front of her friend with an admiring look, Gina asked her if she often attended balls at the imperial palace. Grabbing her hand, she also asked if this meant that she had seen the people in these portraits in reality, and asked if there was anyone among them who looked different than in the portrait. After looking closely at the portraits and thinking for a bit, Lilith, noting that she was not sure and did not know whether it was possible to say such a thing, pointed to the portraits of Baron Aaron and Viscount Enoch. Looking at her friend with a smile, she said that their appearance in the portraits was too embellished, after which Jaina, having fallen into some bewilderment, was surprised by the fact that even in this world there are those who use filters. Raising her head, Lilith looked at the portraits again and, surprised, asked why she needed all this pile of portraits, after which the heroine, having reported that she had already greatly reduced the number, noted that from the very beginning they did not even fit in the room. The friend asked with great bewilderment whether this was a good thing when Jenna confidently declared that thanks to her, they had managed to get rid of 3 more portraits. Realizing that she was doing a good job of gradually filtering them out, the heroine was frightened by the fact that the remaining guys looked like handsome men with disgusting personalities. Unsure whether to call such karma luck or misfortune, Gina thought about it and realized that she loved all the main characters of the world without prejudice, but at the same time, her taste for the character of the main character was unbreakable. She knew perfectly well that all her favorites were prickly and cold-blooded to the point of cruelty handsome men. Still in her world, she thought with a smile that, of course, in real life she would never want to encounter such a guy, and a romance is a romance and she does not choose a guy for herself in truth. While Lilith looked at her in bewilderment, the girl, remembering that time, thought that if she had known that everything would turn out this way, she would have chosen only sweet and kind main characters. The heroine did not understand at all how she could meet and personally talk to each of them in order to find the main characters, because she could die even from one breath of wind, and besides, they were all not to her taste. Turning to her friend and approaching one of the portraits, which depicted a handsome man with sky-blue hair, Gina asked if she knew who it was. Looking at him and seeing the look that said he would kill her if she said just one wrong word, and the sharp features on his face that seemed like you could cut yourself, the heroine understood that she could not help but read a novel in which such a main character appeared. Not understanding what her friend was even talking about, Lilith, with a puzzled expression on her face, reminded her that this man was His Highness the Second Prince. After some time sitting in the garden and looking with a not particularly pleased look, the same guy with sky-blue hair menacingly noted the lateness and asked how long he had to wait. Jenna was in huge shock when she learned from her friend that this guy was L, who is famous for his angel-like appearance. With tears in her eyes, her friend suggested that she didn't even remember this after another fainting spell, but the heroine, standing in a stupor, said with a smile that this was not so and that she was simply so blinded by him that she couldn't recognize him. After making sure that everything was indeed in order, Lilith continued to list the guys in the paintings, one of whom was his lordship the Duke, and the other was the Lord of the Magic Tower, while the girl watching her listened diligently and wondered who these guys were. Realizing that these three were probably the main characters of the novels, Jenna was quite surprised by such an incredible cast, although she also understood that there should be 4 main characters. While the heroine was deep in thought, her friend suddenly looked down at the floor and sadly noted that she didn't know it was that serious. Jenna asked in surprise why she thought so when the girl said that. After all, she had been having a hard time lately. Still without looking up, Lilith noted that her friend was already too busy, and she also needed to take care of herself, so she didn't want to burden her anymore. Looking at the girl in surprise, Jenna, having thought everything over carefully, suddenly realized that she had been so busy with her work that she had not paid attention to the people around her. Lilith Trisha, daughter of the Marquise Trisha, is Gina's only friend and also one of the most beautiful women in the Empire with an influential background and a higher education. Along with this, she is also a very sweet and kind girl who always smiles and is always ready to help. When Jenna was sick, she took care of her for a whole month like a sister and did not leave her side for a single step. Understanding that it is important to rest at such moments, the main character with a smile suggested to her friend to take a walk together to the greenhouse, noting that she wants to show her that now she is better than ever. Hearing this, Lilith was quite surprised, after which Gina reported that she had heard that the magic of the ancient great wizard was still preserved and rare flowers still grow there. The heroine was stunned when, after she clarified that this was the largest greenhouse in the Empire, her friend said that this was not so, after which Gina said that since she was not feeling well, she had never seen it in person. She cried out in surprise when Lilith informed her that only members of the imperial family or those who had received permission could enter the greenhouse. Lost in thought, Jenna didn't know what to say because she didn't understand at all why everything was so strict, although it was just a greenhouse. Noting that everything was fine, Lilith noted with a smile that she was very sorry that no one appreciated the dignity of the Este family except herself. The heroine shuddered in surprise when suddenly, appearing out of nowhere, the fairy announced that she agreed with this, and also noted that if she went to the greenhouse today, she might unexpectedly get lucky. While the heroine, looking around with displeasure, did not understand why the fairy had become so active today, Lilith suddenly asked if she could ask her for one favor. The girl, whose beauty befitted an angel, asked if she could come visit Gina tomorrow if she didn't mind, after which Gina herself, in great shock from such beauty, immediately agreed. Sometime later, when the sun was shining brightly in the sky, the servants were pleasantly surprised to see their lady and assumed that she had decided to take a walk. With tears in her eyes, one of the maids said that she was very glad that her lady was much better because before that she often fainted and often felt dizzy, when suddenly another, looking at her with bewilderment, asked whether their lady was heading straight to the greenhouse. Standing right in front of the greenhouse gates, Gina thought about the fact that, at the moment, the 3 possible main characters are the Second Prince, the Grand Duke, and the Lord of the Magic Tower. She understood perfectly well that the daughter of an ordinary count had no right to come into contact with any of them, so she decided to first meet with the most ordinary candidate, hoping that he would be gentle. As Gina walked closer and closer to the greenhouse, she was not entirely sure she would be able to find him, let alone talk to him, but at the same time, she also realized that time was running out. Knowing that she needed to gather information anyway, she reached for the door handle, thinking that she knew little about him, but according to others, he had a bad temper. Her surprise knew no bounds when, after she tried to open the door with the thought that she would get into trouble if she made a bad first impression, someone suddenly pulled the door sharply and it began to fall. As she fell to the floor, her face buried right into the floor, the guy standing next to her watched the scene with a stony face. Not understanding who did it, she got up from the floor and started shouting that he should be more careful, noting that there were people around. she immediately fell silent, and a look of great surprise appeared on her face when she turned around and saw the guy from the portrait in front of her. Looking at the girl sitting on the floor, he repeated her words with some displeasure, after which he angrily asked how she could treat a member of the imperial family like that. The heroine was quite surprised when she suddenly saw the smart watch on her hand light up. Assuming that this meant that this was the main character, Jenna covered her watch with her hand in surprise and wondered if this meant that she had completed the task. She was quite surprised when suddenly, again appearing out of nowhere, the fairy suggested that she seemed to have forgotten the details of the task and clarified that the condition for completing the task was to find the first novel. Noting that the guide had just met the second prince, the fairy said that the guide knew nothing about the work, not even the title, plot, or characters, and then suggested that she try to get clues from the prince standing in front of her. Jenna just looked towards the window in surprise because she understood that she was hearing such conditions for the first time, and earlier she was told to just find the main character. Anger appeared on the heroine's face when the fairy suddenly declared that she had never said anything like that, when suddenly the prince, who had been standing in front of the girl all this time, asked why she continued to sit like that. Telling herself not to worry, Jenna immediately got up from the floor thinking that this was a unique opportunity and she could fix everything. Having bowed before the prince, she said that it was a great honor for her to meet His Highness the Prince, although she understood that all this was because she had read many, many novels. While the heroine, lost in her thoughts, was thinking with complete confidence that she would be able to surprise him, the second prince looked at her with a not very pleased look. All her thoughts immediately dissipated, and she herself fell into great shock when the prince asked her whether she had studied the rules of etiquette. After Jenna sadly announced that she was still studying, the guy immediately asked how old she was, to which he heard that she was 20. The prince immediately said that this was enough, when Gina, looking away and not knowing at all what to answer, suddenly announced that training should continue regardless of age. The heroine did not quite understand what he meant by the question of whether she had mastered the forms of greeting, after which the prince, looking away, concluded that the count had not taken care of her training, since she did not even know that she needed to arrive on time. Hearing this, the heroine was quite surprised and immediately wanted to resolve this misunderstanding by saying that she just went out for a walk. While she wanted to clarify the situation, the guy, without even listening to her, asked her to stop chatting and go home, commenting that he had already waited long enough. Jenna was stunned when she heard these words, because she was very unhappy that there seemed to be no one here who could listen. After some time, still continuing to follow the prince and trying to keep up, the heroine became immersed in her thoughts, reflecting on the current situation. She realized that the second prince, the main male character who had come to the greenhouse, had waited an hour for the count, who was supposed to see him out. However, the count was nowhere to be found, so instead she, who had come simply for a stroll, was taken for his guide. Thinking about this, Jenna was horrified, but at the same time, she also understood that the count, or rather her father, was a good man, but he had a lost image. When at that moment a window appeared in front of the girl, which said that she could die if she missed her chance, the heroine was quite angry about this, because she knew very well who exactly was to blame for this. Gathering her strength, she tried to put on a cute expression and asked why the second prince was in this place. When the guy answered with a cold look that he came to look at the flowers, the girl thought seriously and could not understand why he needed a guide at all if he came to the greenhouse just to look at the flowers. Suddenly, a certain thought came into the heroine's head, immediately after which she asked the prince whether he had come here to give flowers to someone. She realized that her guess was correct when the prince, having agreed, said that he wanted to give a gift to his younger sister. The guy asked with a serious look if there were any problems when he saw how surprised Jenna was by his answer, but she immediately reported that this was not the case at all. Hearing these words, a smile appeared on the heroine's face after she realized what kind of man he was. Now she has found out that he is an icy man who doesn't even talk to the opposite sex, but adores his only younger sister. Despite this, the main character of the novel is the only one who gets close to him, and as a result, he falls in love with her, which is a typical cliché in romantic novels. Continuing to stare at the prince's back, Gina thought that there were quite a few such main characters, but judging by the prince's distinctive hair color, he was quite a memorable character. All her thoughts were dispelled when the guy suddenly stopped in place, and with a mesmerized look, noted that this place had not changed at all. The heroine didn't quite understand what he meant, but looking up, Her eyes filled with admiration when she saw the charming view. She immediately came to her senses when she noticed the prince's gaze on her, after which, immediately noting that she was His Highness's guide, she tried to at least think of something. Trying to somehow get out of it, she pointed to the lanterns, after which she asked if the prince knew that they were magical, although she herself could not understand why she said this. Hearing this, the prince became quite angry, and noting that it was obvious, since the palace took care of their service, he suggested that she seemed to be testing him. The heroine broke out in a cold sweat of fear when she realized that if there were only 4 novels, that meant 3 more equally complex characters. When a window appeared in front of her with motivating words about not being sad, Gina became even more angry and mentally screamed at the fairy to be quiet. The prince and the girl were extremely surprised when, after the guy said that this place was very beautiful and would remain so even if the lights went out, the lights suddenly went out and they were left in pitch darkness. Looking into the darkness, the prince did not understand at all what was happening, after which the girl suggested that perhaps something was broken. Hearing this, the boy had a misunderstanding about whether the magical item could break, because he understood that this meant that the magicians were no longer doing their job. Seeing the stupid expression on the girl's face, who did not understand at all what he was talking about, the prince only firmly stated that this was enough. The heroine did not quite understand what he meant when the prince, saying that they had better leave because the greenhouse without light could be dangerous, moved forward. Trying to keep up with the guy, the girl lifted her dress and quickly moved forward, asking the prince to be a little slower. Suddenly, something grabbed her by the leg, after which she fell to the ground with loud screams, also knocking down the prince along with her. Opening her eyes, she was in great surprise when she realized that her lips had just touched the cheek of the prince lying beneath her, who at that moment was no less surprised. Having come to her senses and realizing what had just happened, Gina began to ask for forgiveness with horror in her eyes, while the prince continued to lie there, not understanding the whole essence of the situation. Jumping up from her seat and jumping away from the guy as far as possible, the heroine began to insist that she didn't want this, arguing the situation by the fact that she had something on her ankle. Hearing these words, the guy rose from the floor with a menacing look, after which, saying that everything had begun, he began to pull out his sword. Seeing the sword before her, Gina was horrified, and with a trembling voice, she began to assure the prince that she could swear by heaven itself that it was a mistake. A few seconds later, after a loud scream, Gina suddenly saw the prince hit something around her ankle with his sword, after which she immediately asked in disgust what it was. Jenna was in great surprise when the guy asked her if she knew that tree roots were alive and moving. When the prince clarified that she was the owner of this greenhouse, the girl, looking at the roots with surprise, said that, strictly speaking, they were not hers, but her parents'. With a smile on her face, she also said that this was her first and probably last time here. When she also wanted to report that all this was the reason why she was not feeling very well, the guy, without even letting her finish, noted that it seemed like the rumors were true. Jaina didn't quite understand what he meant, after which the prince informed her that she was unaware of her family's heritage and had also been carelessly raised. While the girl, after these words, with a stony face, thought that he would hardly leave it like that, the prince began to tell about how 1,000 years ago, strong magic was cast in this greenhouse, which has survived to this day. At the same time, he reported that it is for this reason that plants grow here that can only be grown with the help of magical power. The guy also noted that not only unique plants grow here that don't grow anywhere else, but also dangerous species that harm people and need to be controlled so that they don't wake up. When the girl, with an admiring look, clarified that it was something like a house plant, he said that it was the first time he had heard them called that. The prince was horrified when he saw the girl, saying that there was something strange on his shoulder, remove the leaf from his shoulder. The girl did not understand at all what was happening when she saw how the guy, horrified, grabbed her hands and clenched them into fists. She was horrified when a disgusting sound was suddenly heard from her hands, but the guy, trying to somehow calm her down, asked her not to worry, after which he crushed the petal. When Gina asked what it was, the prince shouted that it was a valid sheet, and also told her that as soon as it penetrates the skin of a person or animal, it immediately ignites. The heroine only looked at him in surprise when he, noting that she apparently did not know these basics, asked what was wrong with her. When the girl realized that she almost lost her arm, she immediately thanked His Highness with a sweet smile for saving her. Hearing this, the prince only looked away, after which he admitted that in fact it was she who helped him, which surprised the girl quite a bit. When the girl began to assure him with a smile that this was not so, justifying this by the fact that she did not even know what it was, the prince with a stone face only said that she was just bragging now. Noting that although he did not want to admit it, the prince said that the fact that she had saved him was undeniable, so he asked if she wanted anything. Hearing this, the girl realized that this was a unique opportunity, so she immediately asked if she could ask him a question. When the guy asked in surprise what kind of question that was, Gina, with a happy expression on her face, asked if he knew any very beautiful girls, which also meant if he had met the main character. Hearing this, the prince was perplexed because he did not quite understand what kind of question it was, but the girl, noting that it was her request, with puppy eyes asked him to answer it. Jenna noted it was great when the guy looked away and noted that he knew it, after which she asked with great enthusiasm who it was. She looked at the prince with bewilderment, who proudly declared that she was the most beautiful girl in the world, and at the same time, the most beautiful. The girl did not understand who they were talking about and stood there dumbfounded when the guy, looking away, continued to talk about how charming she was. He didn't quite understand what she meant or what she was getting at when Gina asked him if he considered this girl his ideal type. The girl froze in surprise and realized that she would not live when she found out that he was talking about his sister. Suddenly, a certain thought arose in the heroine's head that perhaps all her assumptions were wrong from the very beginning. She suddenly realized that this could be a cliched novel that begins with the appearance of the protagonist's younger sister, whom he loves so much. Looking at the bracelet on her hand, she realized that although it reacted to the main character, it was not at all necessary for the main character to be the main character. Jaina realized that it could be, for example, a secondary character or a friend of the main character, and it could also be a novel about raising children, so the main character's father or his older brothers could also be main characters. Having analyzed all this, the heroine finally remembered what kind of novel it was, after which the fairy, congratulating her for fulfilling all the conditions, announced that the quest to find the first novel was completed. The girl was very surprised when she was told that as a reward for completing the quest, her health value would increase by 20, and the first level possession would also be activated as a reward for the quest. Some information about this world was unlocked, and Jenna learned that the first novel was called The Youngest Daughter of a Prestigious Family. Reviews from the internet said that this is a decent story about the upbringing of the main character, and although the brothers are annoying at first, behind their back they really care about their sister. Also on the internet, people begged to read this novel to the end, arguing that even if the second brother is annoying at the moment, in the end he will be betrayed like a dog. Having learned the name and looking after the prince, the heroine realized that this was the same second brother, whose name was Louis Porvison, who behaves cruelly, but eventually becomes a dog. Jenna was pleasantly surprised and immediately shouted out that very phrase when, after the message that the description of the main character's character had been created, she was asked to shout out that she wanted to see the character if she wanted to see him. After the phrase was spoken, a window appeared in front of the heroine, which indicated everything about Louis, but looking at the low level of favor, she was quite surprised. She was in great shock when the fairy told her that this meant that this person liked you. The heroine had no idea how she could make an impression now that she was told that the higher a person's favor, the more likely he was to follow a cliché. Looking at the second prince and knowing full well that he didn't follow the cliché anyway, Gina couldn't understand what was going on with these brothers. As she continued to follow him and stare at his back, she thought that when she first saw him, he looked like a brother who couldn't get over the death of his younger sister. Still returning from her thoughts, the girl wanted to ask the prince a certain question, when suddenly at that moment, the lanterns began to shine again. Noticing this, Louis and the heroine were very surprised and also quite happy about this moment. When Jaina expressed interest in knowing why he was included, the prince sighed heavily and asked if she should explain it to him. With an awkward smile on her face, the girl, noting that the light had already been turned on, suggested continuing the tour, but the guy, turning away, did not agree. When he reported that she seemed quite relaxed, despite not understanding the situation, the girl was not at all pleased when she also remembered that she had 7 favors. The heroine was very surprised when suddenly a loud cry was heard calling her by name. Turning to the side, she saw her father, Count Este, who ran towards them and could not understand what she was doing there. Seeing His Highness next to his daughter, the man was very surprised and frightened from not understanding when he arrived here. Approaching the place and seeing the angry expression on the prince's face, the count became even more frightened, and he himself began to tremble. Gathering his thoughts and standing in front of him, the man placed his hand over his heart, after which he spoke the words on the wings of the sky, the breath of peace, and also something else that Gina did not hear at all. Looking at the prince at that moment, and seeing how calm he had become, the heroine was very surprised. And not understanding what it was, she assumed that it was magic. Jenna knew perfectly well that something had happened, but she didn't understand what exactly because she hadn't heard at all what her father was saying. Remembering the prince's question about whether she had learned the rules of etiquette, which had surprised her greatly, the heroine assumed that this was a feature of this world. All her thoughts were dispelled when the prince suddenly, agreeing, lowered his gaze and noted that she had not seen Count Est for a long time. Suddenly, anger appeared in his gaze, and he looked at the count and asked what was happening with his duty to maintain the greenhouses. Seeing such an expression on her face, the man began to tremble even more violently, after which he, hiding behind his daughter, apologized to His Majesty, and then noted that his daughter was a poor, fragile child. While Gina did not understand at all what was happening, her father, comparing her to a fawn, asked the prince to allow him to let her go first. Noting that there was no need to keep an irresponsible person who did not know what was going on by his side, the prince said that the young lady could return. Jenna was very interested, but she only had to agree with a stony expression when Louis announced that they had a serious problem to discuss with the count, who was trembling with fear at that moment. Knowing that she still had something else to check, she knew she couldn't do anything about it. So she turned to the prince and wanted to tell him that she was leaving, as he had said. She was quite surprised when, at that moment, without even letting her finish speaking, the prince asked her to greet him properly next time. Sometime later, one of the maids, standing before her lady with tears in her eyes, asked for forgiveness for not telling her earlier, because she had not thought at all that she would go to the greenhouse today. Taking her lady by the hand, Becky said that she had heard that His Highness had a bad temper, and then asked if any trouble had happened, but Gina reassured her that everything was fine. The heroine also noted that she herself had made a mistake by not telling anyone about it, although at that moment she was also very happy with the fact that as a result of this, she was able to complete the task. She was even more pleased to realize that thanks to this, her health had improved, although not by much. Returning from her thoughts, the heroine suddenly decided to ask the maid about what was happening with the greenhouse, noting that the light there suddenly went out. Suggesting that there seemed to be a delay in fuel deliveries from the imperial family, the maid said that the owner was in charge of the management, and that the delays were only reported today. Gina noted that in that case everything should be fine, and assumed that all this was due to the negligence of the management, and remembering the whole situation yesterday, she felt sorry for the count, whom she left there alone. Lost in her thoughts, she noted the fact that His Highness was not an easy opponent, so she understood that the fact that she would have to deal with at least 3 such people in the future was becoming a very big problem. Wondering if she should put off looking for a protagonist and instead look for a female protagonist, she assumed that at least one such person would be found. When she thought about the main character being as harmless as a hamster and as dazzling as a ray of sunshine, the image of her friend Lilith suddenly popped into her head. Sometime later, sitting in the garden and sipping a cup of hot tea, Lilith asked her friend with a smile what was the matter, noting how she said that she wanted to tell her something. Sitting in front of her with a stony expression on her face, Jenna waited for some kind of reaction from the bracelet, but received nothing. She was disappointed, realizing that if Lilith had been the lead female performer, there would have been some kind of reaction long ago. Suddenly, a thought came into her head, after which the girl, turning to her friend, asked if she knew anything about the greeting of the imperial family. After quoting the phrase on the wings of the sky, the breath of peace, Lilith asked if this was what she meant, after which Gina happily agreed. Not understanding what was going on, Lilith noted that her friend had begun buying up portraits of the entire empire and said that she was very concerned that Gina continued to behave in a way she had never behaved before. When she asked with tears in her eyes if everything was really okay, Gina, sitting with an awkward smile, said that she was fine and nothing had happened. With a heavy sigh, the heroine said that after her friend left, the second prince came to the greenhouse, and it seemed she made a mistake, because he told her that next time she should greet him properly. Noting that he is indeed very demanding, Lilith said that there were times when he would not let people go until his name was pronounced correctly. The heroine did not quite understand what she meant, after which her friend said that she should always be careful in his presence and reported. Lilith explained that pronouncing the names of the royal family in the divine language was not an easy task, but if she was careful, there would be no problems. A friend also compared this language to magic, because it sounds very romantic, and also noted that, in addition to this, the name pronounced during a bow can only be heard by this person. Hearing this, Jenna immediately remembered that situation in the greenhouse when, after her father's words, she heard nothing, and now she understood why that was. Lilith was very surprised and did not quite understand what was being discussed when her friend asked her to tell her the name of the second prince. She informed the girl that unless it was a name widely known among the common people, it was forbidden to carelessly mention the name of a member of the imperial family. Gina's horror knew no bounds when she learned that all the nobles of the capital receive knowledge about the imperial family and their names when they reach adulthood, and she should already know the name of His Highness well. The heroine understood that she knew nothing at all because she had taken possession of Jen's body several months ago when she had already reached adulthood. She grabbed her head from the realization that everything she knew about this game she read in a novel a long time ago. When the heroine asked with horror in her eyes what would happen if she forgot them, her friend said that true names have sacred power, so once you hear them, you can never forget them. After Lilith said that Visen was a family of saints called by the gods to end the Continental War, the heroine was quite surprised, but she also realized that she vaguely remembered the situation involving the gods. The Youngest Daughter of a Prestigious Family is a novel that begins with the discovery of a daughter who had 3 brothers in an abandoned corner of the imperial palace. Surprisingly, this daughter could use the sacred power granted by the gods, which quickly made her a real treasure of the empire. The emperor himself was a cruel tyrant, indifferent to his children, so the child, being subjected to violence for a long time by nannies and servants, tried to somehow survive on his own. Thinking about all this, Jenna realized that during all this, she had unwittingly charmed her father and brothers with her cuteness, turning the novel into a classic story about raising children. As she continued to dig through her memories, she suddenly realized that this was all she could remember, but not the real names. Suddenly, the thought came to her mind that the second prince, Louis, was the cold and arrogant brother in the story who would soon regret it. But remembering yesterday's events, the heroine realized that the Louis she saw yesterday was completely different, and realizing that he definitely deviated from the cliché, Jenna wondered if this could become a problem. When she suggested that all this could be due to the lack of conflict, a window suddenly appeared in front of her, after which the fairy said that she was very proud that she was taking such an active part. The girl was very surprised and outraged, but despite all her requests to wait, the fairy, offering to check it all out herself, transferred her to the beginning of a new quest. Sometime later, while in the library, the main character thoughtfully studied the information, both in books and with the help of a fairy. Not knowing if she had found out everything that could be found, the wife assumed that with her health being 20 out of 100, she should still be able to move around. She understood that the huge problem was that she had no way to know the true names of the royal family, and also, looking at the window in which she had the possession skill indicated, she could not understand what it meant. All her thoughts were dispelled, and she herself shuddered with fear when one of the maids suddenly ran into the room, loudly calling her. With tears in her eyes, Becky noted that she needed to take her medication and began to question her about why she was refusing to take it. Hearing this, the lady indignantly asked who else would take such a quantity of medicine, and then noted that she only had a cold. When the maid cried out that the doctor had prescribed all of this, Gina, trying to somehow calm her down, suggested that the prescription might have been wrong. The heroine only sighed heavily from the understanding that she could not say that her disease could not be cured with medicine, and she had to raise her health points with the help of the damned quest. At that moment, blinding with her beauty, Becky, with tears in her eyes, said that she did not know what she would do if something happened to the lady, after which the heroine immediately agreed to take the medicine. Wiping away her tears, the maid suddenly remembered that her lady had never met the doctor in person before, as she was always asleep at that moment. Jenna looked at her with great surprise, after which the girl told her that the Count had brought her personal doctor with great difficulty from a distant kingdom. Becky reported with great admiration that the doctor was a wonderful man, thanks to whom her lady was able to restore her health. While the maid assured her that the doctor had promised that she would be healthy for many years, the heroine, lost in her thoughts, noted for herself that her health points had always been equal to 1 out of 100. She was very surprised by the fact that he guaranteed the opposite, although the fairy oracle told her that she would not live long. When the girl asked in bewilderment if he was a scammer, a guy suddenly entered the room and immediately asked if she was old enough to refuse the medicine. Entering the room and asking Jenna why she was becoming uglier every day, the heroine's brother, whose name is Paulo Este, suggested that it was because she was always lying in bed. He was very indignant and asked who told her that when she noted that they looked the same, in response to which he only received a question about what happened, since he was home in the middle of the day, and whether he had finally been fired. The girl was very surprised when Paulo said that it was all because of the royal ball next week, because now there was a lot to do with outfits and everything else. The brother did not understand at all what kind of reaction she had when Jenna, jumping up from her seat, with great enthusiasm began asking about when this ball would be. Noting that she had also received an invitation, the guy clarified that it was Her Highness the Princess's birthday. Lost in thought, the heroine noted that she also needed to go there, but her brother, asking how she was going to go there being so weak, said that her father would never allow her to do so. The maid, standing to one side, watched with an anxious expression as her lady, having declared with complete confidence that she was fine, reported that she was now healthier than ever. Along with this, Jaina also stated that she wants to do whatever she wants while she is conscious, and she doesn't even need her father's permission to do so. She knew perfectly well that her father had a weak heart, so he would quickly give in if she started to persuade him. Looking at his sister, Paulo realized that he was not the man to stop her, so, noting that there were only a couple of days left, he asked how many days she would need to prepare. When Jaina said with a smile that this time would be enough for her, the maid standing next to her said with tears in her eyes that up until that moment she could not understand her lady. When the heroine looked at her in surprise, Becky confidently declared that she would immediately call all the capital's tailors, but Jenna, trying to stop her, said that she shouldn't go that far. Having asked her miss not to worry about anything, the maid assured her that she would take care of everything herself. Turning around and looking at the board that listed a new quest to meet the princess, Gina realized that in this case she would be able to complete the quest. Also, looking at the windows in front of her, which offered to find out what was wrong with the main character of the novel, she also learned that if she did not meet the main character, her health points would drop to 1 again. Thinking about it, Gina realized that if her memory served her right, this was a ball in honor of the princess's birthday, which her tyrant father was reluctantly organizing at the insistence of his servants. At this event, a tyrant father witnesses his daughter being harassed by rude people, which leads to him helping the main character for the first time, which becomes an incredibly important event. Knowing it was coming next week, Jenna suspected it was too good to be true. Even in ancient times, when there was a war on Earth, one of the knights walking behind the king tried to call him. When His Highness turned to him, the knight said that he felt that he would not be able to witness the heights that the king would reach. Falling to his knees and dragging drops of blood along the ground, the soldier only asked the king to always remember him. He put his hand to his chest, with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face, and said that he was his eternal knight, Embernet. At that very moment, Jenna suddenly woke up in the middle of the night with tears in her eyes and was very shocked. After some time, dressed up in an evening dress, the heroine walked down the corridor, yawning loudly and stretching her arms up. Seeing this, her brother noted that it was very similar to her, and then asked her to at least cover her mouth when she yawned, but the girl, ignoring his request, noted that she felt like she had not slept all night, but as if she had been watching a movie all night. The guy didn't quite understand what she meant, but Jenna simply asked him to ignore it. She stated with all seriousness and determination that this was not so when her brother informed her that they could return if she was tired. Hearing this, a barely noticeable grin appeared on Paulo's face, and then he said that he couldn't even believe that the day had come when he would see her off to the ball. Taking her hand, they headed into the hall, while the brother continued to tell the girl to be careful and take care of herself. Entering the hall itself, where many couples were already dancing, Jenna was in great delight, because she understood that this was a real romantic novel. Noticing such delight, her brother asked her why she was looking around as if she was there for the first time, and then with a grin, he informed her that her already unattractive face had become even uglier. When the girl, sighing heavily, asked him if he had ever been spat in the face, he, not understanding what was being discussed, stated with complete confidence that he had such a perfect face. Looking around, Jenna noted how wonderful it was here and said that she never thought she would be able to come here. Her eyes were full of delight from the understanding that balls are a place where all sorts of incidents and scandals happen, so she can't even believe that she is at a ball. She was very surprised and immediately came back from her thoughts when her brother suddenly placed his palm on her head. Paolo said with a smile that she should first greet the emperor, and then noted that if someone spoke to her, she should cover her mouth with a fan. Asking him not to worry, Gina confidently stated that she was no longer a child, and also noted that Lilith would also be here soon. Smiling at the relief it was, the guy patted her on the back, said they would see each other again, and headed in the other direction. After another insult from her brother, in which he called her ugly, the girl only looked at him in bewilderment because she understood that they looked the same. She was thrown into horror while all the other ladies began to whisper among themselves when suddenly a voice was heard from the hall that His Highness the Prince was descending. While the prince was coming down to everyone with a serious face, people were saying that he was as beautiful as an angel. Seeing him himself made Jen shudder even more as she imagined him with a fierce look telling her to find out his true name. Looking at the prince, the heroine could not understand why the main character, who is not the main character, was behaving so dispassionately. The girl was amazed when she suddenly noticed how the bracelet on her hand began to react. Not understanding what this was about, since the prince was standing on the other side, she noticed out of the corner of her eye how a small child was crawling out from behind the tablecloth. The heroine was very surprised to see a child here, but noticing the silver hair with a tint of sky blue, she realized that in front of her was the main character of this novel, the little princess. Jenna was amazed when, after she wanted to greet the princess, the little girl rushed away from the table at great speed. Without even having time to react, the girl continued to stand in one place in great shock and, not understanding why she was running away, was also surprised by such speed, which is quite consistent with the main character. As the little girl ran through the crowd, Jenna quickly ran after her, apologizing to people and asking them to move aside. Shouting after the princess asking her to stop, she could not understand how a child could be so fast. At that moment, taking a step forward, the heroine caught her long dress and then flew down with a loud scream, when suddenly someone caught her. Turning around, she saw a smiling guy in front of her, who immediately asked if she was okay. At this time in the hall, Lilith, calling for her friend, could not understand what to do, because Jaina did not respond anywhere. Looking around with concern, she just continued to wait, because earlier Jenna told her that she would wait for her here. At that moment, trying to get up, the heroine, noting that she had been careless, thanked the guy, to which he replied that it was not her fault at all. Looking up again at the guy, who at that moment was saying that he was very glad that she was not hurt, the girl noticed that he was incredibly handsome. Despite this, she also felt some danger because he looked like he had a bad character. When the thought arose in the heroine's head that she had already seen him somewhere, a soldier passing by turned to the Duke and asked if he was okay. The guy looked at Gina in surprise, who, hearing the soldier's words, was shocked and pointed at him with her mouth open. When the heroine heard that he was a duke, she immediately remembered that he was one of those 3 handsome guys in the portraits. Wondering if this meant that he was the main character of one of the novels, the girl immediately looked at her bracelet, which at that moment was only loading information. Hearing the shouts in the crowd, she immediately turned to the side, and seeing the princess there, she realized that there was no way she could miss her. Thanking the guy again, Jenna noted that if it weren't for his help, she would have been bedridden, to which the guy himself was very surprised and didn't know what to answer. Turning around, she said that she was in a hurry now, so he could consider it a duty. Running forward, she shouted after him with a smile that he could add interest. The Duke, seeing such an expression on her face, only continued to look in surprise after the running girl, who at that moment could not understand how the princess had managed to escape so quickly. When the soldier, seeing the Duke's reaction, turned to him, the guy, still continuing to stand in one place, said that he did not recognize her name. Sometime later, running out into the garden, Jenna, with cold sweat on her face, could not catch her breath. Looking around and realizing that she had apparently lost the baby, the heroine could not understand how the child could be so agile. Breathing heavily, the girl realized that if she had known that this would happen, she would have talked to the Duke longer, but now nothing would work. Suddenly, raising her head up and looking at the moon, Jenna suddenly wondered where she was at all. Hearing some rustling in the bushes, she began to tremble because she could not understand at all who could be in such a place. Turning around, she saw how the little princess suddenly jumped out from behind the bushes and then screamed loudly from such surprise. Jumping out from behind the bushes, the little girl sat down on the grass and declared that this distance was her limit. Seeing such a facial expression that was downright doll-like, Jenna's eyes sparkled with admiration. She was frightened when the little girl turned to her and asked with a terrifying look whether she would take responsibility if her bones were broken. Looking at the girl with bewilderment and apologizing to her, the heroine could not understand what was being discussed. In response to which the princess, assuming that her ears were blocked, repeated that if something happened to her, she would take responsibility. When the fairy reported that the quest to meet the little princess was completed, Gina, with great indignation, told her not to make her laugh and said that the heroine would never have behaved like that. When the heroine was informed that the main character's information had been added to the character list, the girl was in great shock when she saw that the favorability level was 47. Remembering the little girl's brother, who looked at her like a bug and whose level was 7, she couldn't understand why this was so, because she didn't even do anything. At the same time, she also didn't understand what was meant by the line about the princess being extremely dangerous, as it deviated from the cliché of a baby princess who remembers her past life. A fairy suddenly appeared and said that the main character, a little girl who should be loved, remembered her past life due to the distortion of the world. In her past life, the princess was a war hero, and through this she founded an entire empire through conquest. A baby princess with memories of a past life finds her body uncomfortable and suffocating, and also craves alcohol and misses smoking. Jenna was stunned when she also learned that the baby had the character of a grumpy, indifferent old man, and that she would have to correct this distortion as quickly as possible. Looking at this sweet, pretty, charming princess, the heroine could not believe that the old man's mind was hidden within her. While she still couldn't believe that this girl was an emperor from another world, the princess, looking at her, couldn't understand what was wrong with her and whether she could hear her at all. When the little girl asked with great indignation whether this girl was deaf, Gina, looking at her with great bewilderment, did not even know what to answer her or how to address her. The heroine was extremely disappointed when, after she had no idea what to do, a new quest appeared in which she had to make the little princess, who was completely misunderstood by her family, the main character. Jenna was quite surprised when, after the words that this was a gift from a good fairy, a window appeared in front of her, which showed the level of affection of the members of the imperial family. Seeing this window in front of her, the heroine was shocked because she could not understand at all what the princess had done to receive the maximum negative assessment from her father. Seeing also that the second prince was also in the minus, Gina was quite surprised because in her head moments immediately popped up that completely contradicted this. Having thrown all unnecessary thoughts out of her head, the girl forced herself to calm down and think. She knew that while she didn't remember every detail of the novel exactly, she did remember that it followed the clichés of typical parenting stories pretty closely. This means that the main character with the most developed baby talk, baby skills, and cuteness should receive love from her father, brothers, the main character, and even distant relatives. But looking at this princess, Jennu was only horrified because it did not at all correspond to these requirements. Thinking about that same old man, she realized that the princess needed to return to the image of a cute, pretty, sweet princess, suitable for the role of the main character. The heroine was horrified when she realized that she had no idea how to do this. Suddenly, a hint from the fairy appeared, which said that with a high level of affection, sudden events will appear and the main character will fulfill any request without question. Jenna was very happy to hear this, but all her happiness disappeared when the fairy reminded her that the main character's affection level for her was currently 47. All the girl's thoughts quickly dissipated when the princess, shouting her last name, noted that she had been muttering something under her breath for some time. When the little girl asked her if she was sick, Gina could only mentally beg her to do something about her speech. The princess looked at Gina in surprise, who, noting that she was indeed ill, but that she was all right in the head, said that she was actually a little worried because she had lost her brother. With a smile on her face, assuming that it seemed like the young lady was also lost, the heroine asked her if she wanted to go back. The girl didn't quite understand what was being discussed when the little girl noted that it was strange that she was talking to her as if she knew her. Jenna didn't know what to say when the little girl, looking at her with a furious gaze, noted that she had used formal language earlier in the conversation. She watched with her mouth open as the princess spoke about how if she knew her identity, even though it had not been announced, then she was either very perceptive or an assassin who was targeting her. Taking the pacifier out from her bosom, while Jenna tried to convince her that she was not a hired killer, the girl suggested that she had made all the way from the banquet hall specifically just to find it. The heroine screamed in surprise when a bright light suddenly appeared from the pacifier, and she realized that it was something similar to a magic sword from a fantasy novel. When the fairy confirmed her suspicions, Jenna was very outraged by the fact that a child was using such a magical sword. Falling to her knees and bowing her head, the heroine began to ask for forgiveness for pretending not to know her and said that she knew from the very beginning that she was a princess. The little girl was very surprised when the girl told her what she had heard about her from the second prince. She said that the prince called her beautiful, with hair that shone like water and eyes like cherry blossoms. Hearing that the second prince spoke very highly of her, the little girl only looked away, saying that in the end, this guy would make her a target. At that moment, the girl did not quite understand what was being discussed, when suddenly the princess, although having accepted this fact, still angrily noted that the girl had not come this way in order to know how she was doing. Jenna backed away, trying to convince her that it was all a misunderstanding and that she had only followed her because she was so impressed by her cuteness. Having suggested solving the problem with words, but not hearing an answer, she only cried out pitifully, asking for help when the princess, with a sword in her hands, was ready to pounce on her. The heroine was very surprised when at that moment a bright light flared up in her hands, and she, dodging, was able to reflect the blow. Continuing to dodge the blows, the girl was very surprised because she did not understand at all why her body was moving on its own. She didn't quite understand what was going on when the fairy who suddenly appeared again remarked that it was amazing that she had raised her mastery skill from level 1 to the current level. Gina became even more confused when she was informed that the soul and memories of the ancient knight Embernet now belonged to her. After thinking for a bit, that same dream suddenly surfaced in her memories, after which everything fell into place in her head. Noting that she was very quick-witted, the fairy offered to hear the sad story of Embernet, the unfortunate knight who was unable to witness the destruction of his homeland, but Gina was quite angry at the fact that the fairy could not read the atmosphere. Suddenly, blood began to drip from the girl's nose, which surprised her greatly, and the fairy at that moment reported that her health was rapidly deteriorating due to excessive activity, which did not correspond to her current condition, and also recommended that she take a little rest. Looking at her at that moment, the little princess, getting closer and closer, noted that she seemed to be more than just an ordinary person. Gina, standing in a cold sweat and covering her nose with her hands, continued to look at the girl in horror and understood that this was truly madness. After the fairy reported that her health was rapidly declining and her points were becoming smaller with each passing second, the heroine felt herself beginning to fall from powerlessness. Suddenly, at that moment, someone grabbed her hand and prevented her from falling at that moment. Standing up and turning around, the heroine saw only knight's armor in front of her, after which she realized that it was most likely Embernet. When the guy immediately disappeared as if he had never been there, Jenna was in complete shock as she felt tears start to flow from her eyes. Looking at the princess standing in front of her, the heroine felt something incomprehensible that reminded her of that very dream. After thinking for a while, the girl suddenly remembered that in her past life as a princess, she was an emperor, a war hero who founded a great empire with her conquests. Wiping the tears from her eyes, Jaina realized that although she had no proof, it was certainly not a coincidence that she had inherited the memory of a knight who had died on the battlefield. Realizing she had no choice but to try, she revealed that what really made her pursue the princess was the fact that she could see past lives. Hearing this, the princess shuddered in surprise, after which the heroine also told that she was one of those who followed her. Kneeling down, Gina noted that they had finally, after so much time, met the great war hero, Emperor Lot Viken, the only emperor of the continent. Looking at the girl at that moment, the little girl only continued to stand silently with a stony face. Asking her to remember, Gina said that she was her faithful knight Embernet, after which a long silence followed. Suddenly, the baby's gaze changed completely and she cautiously began to ask if she was really Ambernet. Seeing this, Jenna was very surprised, and at that moment the fairy reported that her closeness to the main character had increased by 20%. Rising from her knees, the girl also asked for forgiveness for her strange behavior, arguing that her memory had not yet fully recovered. Her surprise knew no bounds when the princess quickly ran up and hugged her tightly, informing her that everything was fine. Drowning in the baby's arms, the heroine announced with a smile that her name was now Gina Este. She was pleasantly surprised when the fairy reported that the main character remembered the name of the owner of the country, and also congratulated her on the fact that now the main character would trust her. Suddenly, a certain thought came into the girl's head and she squatted down and turned to His Majesty, after which the little girl asked in bewilderment what was going on. The little girl only looked at her questioningly when she asked how she should now address her, specifying Her Majesty or Her Majesty Princess. Noting that she was just an ordinary countess, the girl said that if she addressed the young princess as Your Majesty, it could lead to misunderstandings. When she also said that this was something like treason, the little girl's face immediately changed upon hearing this. Seeing this reaction, Jana immediately reported that this was not the case, and despite the fact that she knew that the princess was a revered ancestor in her past life, they could not explain this to others. Hearing only silence in response, she assumed that she was saying meaningless things and said that she would simply call the princess Your Majesty. She was very surprised when suddenly the little girl, having stopped being silent, began to say something about her eyes. Noticing how she was looking at her now, the princess decided to clarify whether she was Embernet now or Daldal Ochosa, meaning the name of this girl. The little girl cried out that it didn't matter at all when the heroine corrected her, saying that her name was Jana Este, not Daldal Ochosu. Having agreed, Jenna told her that she receives memories in fragments through her dreams. At the same time, she also said with a smile that, however, she lives in the present time as Gina. At this point, noting that all the events of her past life no longer had any meaning, the princess declared that this was precisely why all her searches were pointless. Hearing this, Jenna was in great shock, and when she turned to the princess and wanted to say something in response, the little girl suddenly turned to her herself. With her hands outstretched in front of her, the princess informed Embernet that after he had passed through time, she now considered him an important person in her life. Seeing this, the heroine's eyes sparkled with admiration, but looking to the side and seeing the knight himself there, she asked him with great bewilderment to stop crying. Unexpectedly, the little girl suddenly cried out timidly and announced that this was precisely why, in this life, she would become her new assistant. Jenna was very happy with this statement, still not believing that it was true, and with a smile asked if this meant that she could come to her at any time. While the heroine wanted to hug the princess with a joyful smile, the little girl herself was in great shock and could not believe that Embernet was ready to continue serving her even in this life. The girl froze in midair in surprise when she heard the voice of the guy behind them, who was very surprised that the princess was here all this time. Realizing who exactly this voice belonged to, she and the princess slowly looked to the side and saw the second prince in front of them. Noticing Gina next to the princess, Louis was surprised enough to immediately ask what she was doing there. Noticing the baby's shabby appearance, as well as the drops of blood on the lady's clothes, he assumed that she was trying to harm the princess. Jenna was very surprised by such a statement, when suddenly the fairy reported that the second prince's sympathy for her had significantly dropped and was now 20. As he began to approach the lady with a menacing look, Jaina continued to try to convince him that this was not the case and that she was the victim here. Suddenly, a loud cry from the princess was heard asking for it to stop, after which she said with a serious expression that threatening an innocent person was completely inappropriate behavior for a member of the imperial family. Hearing this, the girl was pleasantly surprised, but also realized that her assumptions that everything was complicated in their family were correct. Although he wanted to object to the princess, the prince nevertheless decided to restrain himself and only inquired about what had happened to the prince sent by His Majesty. When the little girl proudly announced that she had slipped away from him, the guy merely informed her that this was not something to be proud of. Noting that they didn't even know each other, Louis demanded an explanation of what she was doing there with the lady. Looking at their shabby appearance, he still wondered more and more about this question, because he could not understand at all why they were in such a state. When Gina turned to him and wanted to explain the whole situation, he, without even letting her finish, noted that he was not asking her. She exclaimed in surprise when the princess, noting that everything was simple, announced that this girl was her new protector. When the princess asked what was going on, Gina clarified that they were just having fun playing together. The heroine understood perfectly well that if she started to say all sorts of things, people might not understand her correctly, but the princess, not understanding this, only looked questioningly at the girl. Turning her gaze to her brother, the little girl confidently declared that she needed a playmate. Noting that this young lady had amused her greatly, the little girl, with a sweet expression on her face, said that she wanted to continue playing with her. Seeing such a sweet side of the girl, the eyes of the prince and the heroine showed great admiration, while the princess herself thought that he should decide wisely, because she would not tolerate it if he did not allow her. Trying to hide his embarrassment, the prince nevertheless agreed to her request and informed her that, after all, she did not have a suitable partner anyway. The princess, with great bewilderment, objected that she had already said that she liked this girl when the guy began to say that if she needed it, he would look for her playmate. Everyone was in great surprise when, after the prince asked whether the difference in their ages was too great, the little girl stated with complete confidence that, given her age, she was perfect. Pointing to the girl, the princess said that although this young lady looked a little stupid, she was still very cute, so she really wanted to play with her. While the little girl waited with a smile for a positive answer, Jenna, looking at her with tears in her eyes, understood that she really wanted to refuse. Having accepted the whole situation, the second prince said that he should first talk to the young lady so the princess could go. When the little girl asked with a grin what would happen if she refused, the boy said that in that case, His Majesty the Emperor would come here. Hearing this, the princess immediately rushed out of the garden, saying that she was already returning to the palace and that he would be in trouble if he told his father everything. Gina was greatly perplexed when, after she and the prince were alone, he looked at her and asked if she had forgotten how to rise. Trying to get up, she immediately began to fall down with a loud scream, when suddenly, catching her, the prince still did not let her fall. After Louis said that she really knew how to complicate things, the fairy told the girl that the second prince felt sorry for the owner of the system, so the second prince's favor increased slightly. Gina was very surprised to learn that the prince's current sympathy was 18, when suddenly her body began to float in the air with the help of a magic ball. Noting that he had misunderstood her a few minutes ago, the guy said that he would walk her to the entrance to the banquet hall, and she could consider this payment for the situation. Although the girl thanked him, she was very embarrassed by the fact that she was like a helium balloon in his hands, which was not at all romantic. Heading towards the palace, Louis asked how Jenna met his sister, after which she reported that when she went out into the corridor, she saw a little girl who was walking all alone. The guy asked in bewilderment if she meant his sister by this little girl, when the girl said that she was afraid that it would be dangerous for the little girl to walk alone, so she followed her. After hearing a positive answer, he turned to the girl and asked if this was the reason she decided to talk to his sister. He looked at the girl with bewilderment because he did not quite understand what she meant, when Gina, noticing that he was looking at her very intently, said that she was a little embarrassed because of this. With a smile on her face, the heroine told him that she had actually always wanted to have a cute little sister, but instead, she only had a disgusting older brother. Hearing this, Louis simply called her stupid and asked if all sisters usually thought that way about their older brothers. Having heard a positive answer, he thought about it, because he could not understand at all why older brothers were treated so badly. Hearing this, Jenna suddenly realized the whole situation, and looking at what she thought was such a charming kitten, a smile lit up her face. Noting that although she and her brother are not at all similar, Gina said that the prince and princess are the same in everything, from appearance to atmosphere. When she also revealed that they were brother and sister who looked exactly alike, her closeness with the second prince increased, even though he continued to look at her with a stony expression. She was pleasantly surprised to see this, as she had no idea it would work, so she continued to talk about how the princess's eyes were like precious stones. When she continued to talk with a smile about how when she saw the princess, it seemed to her that she had already seen those beautiful eyes, and later realized that they were very similar to the prince's eyes, the guy himself at that moment pretended not to understand what she was talking about. A smirk appeared on the heroine's face when she realized that it was useless for him to make such a stern face, because she could clearly see how favor points were added. The prince informed her that she was still talking nonsense when she remarked that it was amazing that even the light reflected in their eyes was the same, to the point that one could mistake the color. Although the guy tried to show his indifference, the favor points kept increasing, so the girl, trying to take full advantage of this, continued to say that her heart was still pounding at the thought of the princess, because she had never seen anyone so charming in her life. Seeing that the current sympathy was now zero, Jenna was pleasantly surprised when she realized that she had finally restored the sympathy that had fallen to the bottom and could not understand why she had previously been unable to establish a relationship with this person for a long time. Arriving at the place, the prince removed all the magic from the girl, who immediately thanked him for his help. She looked at the prince with an awkward smile and bewilderment when he asked if she should have greeted him. She was horrified and cold sweat ran down her face when she suddenly remembered his words about how she should greet him properly next time. Thinking that she must have gone mad for forgetting this, Gina immediately bowed her head to the prince and apologized for the delay in greeting him. Having collected her thoughts, she calmly began to pronounce the phrase, "Let the breath of wings rest in his heart." Looking at her at that moment, Lewis noted that although it was basic politeness towards others, it was very difficult to hear even this basic greeting from her. With the thought that it seemed like things weren't going to be easy for her in the future, Jaina, standing in a cold sweat, couldn't figure out what to do because she still didn't know his real name. The guy called out to the girl in bewilderment when she suddenly fell silent and stopped in one position, staring at the floor. Jenna looked up in surprise when the prince called her again, this time louder. Her surprise knew no bounds when, lowering her eyes again, she saw drops of blood flowing down her face and falling straight onto the stone floor, after which she immediately covered her nose with her fingers. When the fairy reported that the skill had absorbed too much power and that the transition to a fainting state would occur in 30 minutes, the girl staggered, feeling her condition, while the prince watched this with great shock. She could not understand why her condition was so bad, because she had completed everything and received the main mission, in response to which the fairy explained to her that all her strength was exhausted because of the battle with the little princess. When the prince, not understanding what to do, turned to the girl in fear, Gina only apologized, saying that it was time for her to go, when she saw that the time before fainting had decreased to 2 minutes. Losing consciousness, she only saw the vague silhouette of the prince, who, with great confusion, could not understand what she was talking about. Standing in a dazed state, the girl realized that she had not even finished the greeting, when suddenly the fairy reminded her that she would soon pass into a state of fainting. Realizing that she needed to find someone in 2 minutes, she decided to find Paolo, because if she fainted in the middle of the banquet, they could at least call a doctor for her. Her surprise knew no bounds when the prince, noting that this was terribly reckless, lifted her up in his arms. At this moment, the fairy reported that the main character, the second prince, had increased his sympathy for the girl, and also reminded her again that she would soon pass into a state of fainting. While the heroine was looking at the prince with great admiration, time ran out, and before the fairy could even finish talking about the prince's level of sympathy, Gina fainted. Sometime later, when the sun was shining brightly in the sky, Jenna woke up with great surprise, at first thinking that everything that happened was a dream. Having risen from her bed and realized that she was in her room, the heroine could not understand how she ended up at home. At that moment, one of the maids, entering the room with tears in her eyes, dropped the plate of water from her hands when she saw that her lady had woken up. The heroine was very surprised when Becky immediately ran up to her, hugged her tightly, and said that she was very worried because her lady took a long time to come to her senses. When asked by her mistress how many days she had slept, the girl, with tears in her eyes, replied that she had been unconscious for 2 whole days. Hearing this, the heroine thought about it and realized that if you consider that she lost consciousness, then 2 days is not so bad. Having decided to look at her status, namely health indicators, she opened the window, after which the fairy informed her that her health was significantly exceeded, and also the main character, the little princess, received a bonus reward for a wonderful conversation. Seeing the health indicators at 27 out of 100, Jenna was unpleasantly surprised, because she realized that all this suffering was not worth it, and she needed more. While the heroine was still not satisfied with the fact that she was not given a normal reward, at that moment Paolo appeared in her room, who immediately noted that she had finally come to her senses. When his sister indignantly asked him when he had managed to come in, the guy, with a smile on his face, asked if she had gotten enough sleep and noted that she seemed to be full of energy since the morning. Sitting down in front of the bed, he pretended to understand everything when Jenna reproached him for the fact that a knight could not so calmly enter a lady's room. After asking Becky for forgiveness, he said that he would be more careful, but the heroine, seeing the maid's surprise, only told her not to pay attention to her. Along with this, Paolo also asked to thank Lady Lilith for him, noting that thanks to the carriage with magic that she provided, Gina managed to reach the estate and receive help from a doctor in time. Having heard this and taken note, the heroine thought when she realized that she did not remember anything at all. All her thoughts were dispelled when suddenly her brother asked her about her relationship with the second prince, which she herself was very surprised about. Noting that everyone saw them leave the banquet with the prince, Paolo clarified that the prince is not one to talk about his connections. Jenna was quite surprised when her brother asked her if she even remembered the commotion she had caused. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly realized that she had completely forgotten that Louis had taken her to Paolo. Remembering that very moment, she could not understand what had appeared on the status window. At this point, her brother decided to clarify whether this meant that she wanted to become a princess, but she, very indignant at such a question, said that they were not connected in any way. Gina knew full well that the second prince was definitely her type, but she was still sensible enough to stay away from what was not meant for her. Paolo had no idea what she meant when she asked him if there had been any letters from the royal family. When he asked with surprise whether they had something with the second prince, Gina, calling him stubborn, indignantly reported that this was not the case at all. Thinking about it, the heroine realized that if Louis had not forgotten his promise, then everything should have reached the emperor a long time ago. She also realized that, in all the commotion, she had almost forgotten that her main goal was to reach the 90th level of sympathy from the royal family. Jenna decided that she needed to become a bridesmaid as soon as possible, because for now this is all that matters to such a simpleton, and this is the only reason to meet the princess, while freely moving around the castle. At that moment, the door of the room opened, and the maid who entered the room immediately apologized to the miss and the young master for their rudeness. Holding a tray of letters, she announced that an invitation had arrived from the royal family. While her brother was quite surprised to hear about the royal family, Gina just smiled confidently at that moment. Sometime later, the heroine, accompanied by her brother, went to the royal palace. When the girl confidently stated that she could go alone, Paolo merely said that he was just going to work. After his sister asked him what kind of knight could come to work at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Paolo resolutely said that it was possible when you were doing a great job. Jenna didn't quite understand what he meant when her brother suddenly asked if she was okay. Noting that although he knew her intellectual age was extremely low, he asked if it was too much to play with a 3-year-old child, to which the girl simply asked if he wanted her to hit him. Looking at the situation from the outside, Jenna could well understand the reason for his anxiety, but despite this, she had already made a decision. 2 days ago, 2 letters arrived from the imperial family, one of which was a letter appointing her as the young princess's playmate. Gina knew very well that such friends were intended to develop social skills and emotional intelligence for aristocrats, and were usually peers who were carefully selected from among noble families, but she herself was far from the same age as the princess. That is why the whole house was turned upside down, and her attention was drawn to another letter, which said that before visiting the princess, she needed to have an audience with the emperor. Gina was quite surprised because she thought that the emperor from the original story, who was so indifferent to the main character, would not have bothered to meet with her, and the problem was that this was not good news at all. Suddenly stopping, Paolo suddenly announced that she would have to go from here alone, to which the girl immediately agreed. The heroine's surprise knew no bounds when her brother, pointing to the huge staircase in front of them, said that she could simply climb up here. After some time, when the girl, using all her strength, finally climbed up to the castle itself, she was immediately met by the butler, and having clarified whether she was Lady Esta, he said that His Majesty was waiting for her. Asking to wait for at least a minute, Jenna, covered in sweat and trying to somehow catch her breath, was very surprised by the fact that someone had to come here to work every day. She noted angrily that no one had asked her when the fairy confirmed her guess that it was probably just because she had low stamina. Entering the emperor's room, she noted the good fact that she would not be called to His Majesty so often, or to be more precise, only once, to resolve this issue now. Raising her head, she saw the same tyrant father, whose name was Franz Konrad Wissen from the novel The Youngest Daughter of a Prestigious Family. Although Gina didn't remember all the details, she knew perfectly well that if he had the tyrant setting, it meant that he was dangerous and heartless, so in any case it was better not to contradict him. At the same time, the heroine also understood that there was a very high probability that this character would not be happy with her. Coming closer and bowing before the king, the girl introduced herself and noted for herself the excellent fact that at least she did not have to say those notorious greetings. Thinking about it with a smirk, she guessed that it was most likely because His Majesty's real name could only be pronounced by the Empress, which played into her hands. Looking at the girl, the Emperor said that he had heard that his daughter liked her and that she wanted this lady to become her friend. Noting that the princess had even appointed her for this role, the man asked if this was true, to which Gina agreed and said that it was a great honor for her. When the king noted that she couldn't help but like it, the heroine could only continue to listen to it, maintaining a smile. Her brother's words immediately came to mind, asking her to listen to her carefully and telling her to watch her language when she spoke about the princess in the presence of His Majesty. Jaina was very surprised and asked the reason when Paolo told her that everyone knew that the princess and the king had a terrible relationship. Assuming that she would hardly understand, the guy said that in fact the princess was trying to cut the emperor with her toy or something like that. When the heroine suggested that it was a pacifier, her brother, agreeing, was quite surprised by the fact that she knew this from somewhere. Assuming that she was imagining herself slitting His Majesty's throat, Paolo informed her that no matter how sweet she was, any parent would be shocked by such behavior. He exclaimed with great bewilderment because he did not understand at all what his sister meant when, after thinking for a moment, she noted that it made sense. Remembering how she herself saw this pacifier turn into a magic sword, Gina noted to herself that such sympathy was quite understandable because even for her, who knew the whole story, it was a shock, and for the family, it was probably a huge shock. Despite this, the heroine could not understand why the little girl had such hostility towards the emperor, who seemed to be her real father, so she assumed that he might have angered her in some way. Remembering the image of the little girl whose mind was like that of an old man, the heroine realized that this princess was capable of much more. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the emperor noted that friends for games are chosen from among peers, after which Gina reported that she knew this. Noting that she, despite this, still agreed, the emperor said that he wanted to meet her only to ask if it was true. Hearing this, the heroine was quite surprised, because this was not at all the reaction she expected. Looking at the emperor, she realized that he now looked more like a father who was worried about his daughter. Giving the example of the prince who doted on his sister, Gina found it all strange, after which she suggested that the sympathy scale might not correspond at all to the feelings of the emperor. Her surprise knew no bounds when the fairy, noting that this was entirely expected from a traveler, announced that she had discovered a hidden quest. The fairy said that the heroine had correctly noticed that something was wrong with the tyrant and suggested finding clues about the main character's relationship through a conversation with the tyrant. In case of success, she would receive plus 50 points of the emperor's sympathy for the main character. Noticing the reward, the girl realized that this was a great opportunity to reduce the scale by almost half, so in any case, she should try. She noted for herself the strange behavior of the prince, who doted on his sister, which was opposite to the low level of sympathy and the contradiction that arose from the behavior of the emperor. When the girl had already collected her thoughts, the emperor suddenly announced that their conversation was over and she could go to the princess's palace, which surprised her very much. After clearing her head, she realized that she had been threatened with death so many times that she had gone completely crazy, so this couldn't be a great opportunity if she might end up dying. As she reached out to refuse the quest, a window suddenly popped up, telling her that if she accepted the quest, the emperor would grant her a rare limited buff that would allow her to hear only the truth for 3 minutes. Seeing such conditions, the girl had no choice but to agree, although on the other hand, she still did not want to accept these conditions at all. The second prince, standing to the side, watched in bewilderment as, after the emperor announced that she could go, the lady turned to him and asked if she could ask him something. He couldn't understand what she was talking about when, after she clarified that from that day on she would be considered the princess's playmate, his father noted that it was true. When she asked if this meant that she would be able to visit Her Highness every day, the Emperor, noting that she was now a playmate, said that she could. Looking at the timer above her head, which showed 2.5 minutes left, the girl could only hope that she would not regret her decision. His Majesty didn't quite understand what she meant when Gina asked if he had any concerns about a grown-up like her taking on the role. When the girl suggested that there might be a person who would be better suited for this role, the Emperor announced that she was the first one his daughter had personally chosen. After the Emperor said that this answer was enough, Gina, looking at him with bewilderment, asked what would happen if someone approached her with bad intentions. Noting that even if it was the princess's playmate, the king with a terrifying look announced that in such a case, this person's head should be cut off from his shoulders. The heroine shuddered, but she tried to keep a smile, while His Majesty, noting that her questions were very interesting, asked if she had anything else. Looking at the time, which showed just under a minute, Jenna understood that it was too late for regrets, and she couldn't back down. When she asked why Her Highness had chosen her, the king asked what could be more important than his daughter's wishes. The girl's assumptions were correct because she made sure that now the Emperor is not such an indifferent father as in the original, and it is difficult to believe that he can harm the princess. Jenna understood that if this was his intention, then it was already obvious, so in the remaining 40 seconds she needed to make sure that her guess that the Emperor hated the princess was not true. Not knowing how to start the conversation, the girl noted that Her Highness seemed very mature for her age, and at the same time she spoke very fluently. When there were 30 seconds left in the quest, she also reported that the princess was the most beautiful child she had ever seen. When the Emperor demanded that she continue her words, and the timer was getting shorter and shorter, Gina, having gathered her courage, turned to the Emperor. With 10 seconds left on the timer, the heroine, resigned to any outcome, asked the Emperor if he hated the princess. Hearing such a question, everyone was in great shock, while Jenna herself, standing in complete bewilderment, could not understand what she had done. Looking at the girl with disdain, the Emperor only angrily asked how this was even possible. At this point, the quest effect ended, and the Emperor, quite angry at this question, began to use magic towards the girl, which surprised her very much. At this moment, the fairy, noting that the health condition had sharply worsened due to the strong consumption of mana, noted that at the moment the current health condition was 15 out of 100. Falling to her knees, she began to insist that this was not what she had meant at all, when the Emperor, with an angry look, asked if she meant to say that the princess was not his blood daughter. She was quite surprised when she turned to the side and saw the second Prince Louis standing in front of her, who came closer and addressed his father. At first, not understanding what had happened, the girl was pleasantly surprised when she realized that he was going to help her. Noting that he shouldn't treat the lady like that, Louis clarified that she was so weak that she couldn't even walk 3 steps before she was already vomiting blood. Saying that such threats would definitely kill her, he said that he personally witnessed it during the princess's birthday celebration. He said that this lady was the only person who managed to find a common language with the princess. Hearing his son, the Emperor, still with the same angry expression on his face, turned to Lady Esta with some order. Running out of the room and closing the doors, the heroine felt herself swaying from side to side due to her poor condition. Having taken it as hereditary that they all pulled out their sword first, she caught herself thinking that she was just a little bit away from dying right there. Thinking about it, she suddenly realized that she really could have died there, and if the prince had not interceded, she might already be dead now. At this point, the fairy reported that the quest conversation with the tyrant had been completed, and rewards had been received in the form of an increase in the health points of the lady who had been hit by 13, and the level of sympathy of the Emperor by 50. Turning to the fairy at this moment, Gina asked to show the level of the Emperor's sympathy. Seeing the 25 mark, she found it strange, because she knew very well that the Emperor showed sufficient attention to his daughter, and the reason why, even so, he could not get closer to her was she herself. Noting that this had been a concern for her from the start, she clarified that the level of sympathy she saw was actually the level of sympathy the main character felt for her family members. The fairy noted that it was amazing that she had guessed, while the heroine herself was not at all happy that this brat had deliberately hidden everything and at the same time given a hidden quest. After telling the fairy to express herself more clearly in the future, the heroine thought about it, and realizing that the story would become even more confusing if the hopeless level of sympathy belonged to the princess, She suggested that perhaps the emperor was like a descendant from a past life for the princess. After thinking for a moment, she realized that she had heard something important before when she was Embernet, but she couldn't remember it, and the situation was not at all suitable to worry about it. At that moment, one of the servants approached her and, after asking if she was Lady Esta, said that he had to escort her to Her Highness the Princess, also asking if there were any problems. Having thrown all unnecessary thoughts out of her head, Jenna realized that first she should finally meet the main character herself. Sometime later, arriving with the servants at the princess's castle, Jenna's surprise knew no bounds. Seeing a dilapidated room in front of her, she asked if this was really the princess's place of residence, to which she received a positive answer. After the servant said that he would wait near the guest room, the heroine, looking around more carefully, noted that for the palace of a member of the imperial family, it looked too shabby and gave the impression that it was not being looked after at all. She cried out in surprise, and all her thoughts disappeared when the princess suddenly appeared and loudly asked who was there. Seeing a girl in front of her, who at that moment fell to the floor in fear, the little girl was pleasantly surprised because she had previously thought that they were invaders. While Gina looked at the princess with great surprise, the little girl herself, with a smile, noted the importance of the fact that she kept her promise, and noting that she missed him very much, greeted Embernet. The heroine said that everything was fine when Her Highness, asking if she was hungry, said that they needed to get some snacks. The girl only smiled awkwardly when, without even letting her finish speaking, the princess ordered the servants to bring food, because she had a guest. Standing to the side, she watched as, after the princess's request, the maid, unpleasantly surprised, noted that it was not lunchtime, after which the princess asked her to at least bring light snacks. Seeing the angry expression on her face, Gina couldn't understand what was wrong with her behavior, because after all, she was serving a member of the royal family. After thinking about it, the girl also noted for herself that, along with such immaterial treatment from the maids, the palace itself was very dilapidated. Jumping onto the chair and seeing the girl standing in one place, the little girl asked why she was frozen in place and told her to sit down. Looking at the princess, Gina also noted that her clothes looked old, so she immediately turned to the princess herself. After asking about the clothes she was wearing, the heroine noted that they looked old and asked if they were clothes for training. Hearing this, the princess just looked at her in surprise, saying that she wears this every day. Jenna was completely horrified when she also found out that she also slept and ate in these clothes. When the girl asked what time she was washed then, the little princess, asking her to relax, said with a grin that it was just a fairy tale compared to what happened on the battlefield. The heroine was very surprised by such words, after which, noting that this was not a battlefield, she clarified that now His Majesty was a small child. At the same time, she also noted that it was a mistake on the part of the imperial family to leave a small child in such an environment. Thinking about it, Gina realized that this was very similar to the beginning of the original, where the main character is a child who is bullied and mistreated by her nanny and servants, the youngest daughter of a cold family that does not pay the slightest attention to her. Despite this, the heroine understood perfectly well that for such a story, the emperor and the prince were worried about the princess, so she could not understand what the problem was. After some time, the maid, holding a tray in her hands, announced that she had prepared the snacks they had asked for. Jenna winced in surprise when she abruptly put the tray down on the table, and she couldn't understand what was wrong with it, because a little more, and the saucer would have broken. Seeing the girl's surprised face, the princess asked what had happened, comparing it to her eating a grasshopper. Sitting in complete horror, Jenna shouted out that this maid had just behaved very rudely and almost thrown saucers. When the girl, laughing loudly, said that everything was fine, the heroine had some kind of bad feeling, and she herself was even more surprised. While the little girl was diligently telling something about the king, Gina, lost in thought, could not understand why she simply ignored such behavior of the maids, although she even swung her sword at the king. Taking the liver from the tray, Gina thought about how she had previously assumed that the princess, unlike the character from the original, would not allow herself to be treated like this. The princess watched with great bewilderment as the girl began to tremble and cough after biting into the cookie. When the girl turned to her in surprise, she, with a tremor in her body, reported that the cookies were damn salty. After the princess suggested that they must have overdone it with the salt, Gina, not understanding what kind of cookie could contain so much salt, suggested that they were just trying to make fun of her. Having taken in all the rudeness, which was completely unthinkable in relation to the imperial family, as well as the deception of the princess, Gina could not understand what was going on. The girl was even more surprised, because no matter what it was too much, when the princess, continuing to smile, began to assure her that everything was fine. Continuing to laugh loudly, the little girl proudly announced that, compared to the antics of enemy troops, this was childish candy. Hearing this, Jenna finally realized that it wasn't that she didn't notice and tolerated it, but that she simply wasn't interested in such attacks at all. Looking at the princess, she finally realized that this was the main reason why the story was not progressing. The heroine knew perfectly well that every novel has a climax and a conflict at the beginning, which drives the narrative. In the original novel, the narrative between the tyrant and his daughter began only after the servant's deeds were revealed. But looking at the princess, the girl realized that instead of considering this as a test, she was just coddling her servants, which is why the emperor did not notice anything. After thinking for a while, Gina turned to the princess, noting that she had heard some rumors that she had a very bad nanny next to her. Hearing this, the little girl was not particularly pleasantly surprised when she found out that such rumors were actually circulating, so her expression immediately changed. Gina knew that although the setting itself, in which the servants looked down on and oppressed the princess, was similar, in the original it was at the level of bullying and assault, and not this kind of deception, and at the same time, the nanny who led the bullying was nowhere to be seen. Noting that such a person really did exist, the princess said that he was no longer there, and showing her magic, she clarified that she had seen something that she should not have seen. Seeing this, the heroine was quite scared, but realized that her guess that, unlike the original, the princess did not need help, was correct. Realizing that no help was needed here, because there was no other place where such a brave child could be found, Gina also suggested that perhaps this was the reason why she was so rude to her brothers and father. She was very surprised when the fairy, noting that she was very impressed with her, reported that she had good insight. A new quest appeared before the heroine, during which she had to find out why the princess could not trust anyone, and for completing the task, sympathy for each family member would increase by 5 points. Having learned that she did not trust anyone, the girl realized that in this case it changed everything, and asked the girl if she should tell her father, the current emperor, about this. When the princess asked what she meant, Gina gave the example of the lack of management in the princess's palace, and also, pointing to the cookies, about this complete rebellion. Noting that the emperor does nothing because it doesn't mean anything, the girl said that His Majesty is definitely not a heartless father. The little girl watched in amazement as Jenna assured her that although she couldn't say for sure since she had only met him face to face once, it was nevertheless obvious that he cared and was very concerned about his daughter. Noting that the same thing happened to her, the girl said that she knew perfectly well that in her situation, it was difficult for the princess to get used to her new family. With a smile on her face, Gina said that despite all this, she hopes that the baby will be able to live a new life as Her Highness the Princess. When the princess, looking at her, noted that for some reason she looked desperate, the heroine, confused, said that she simply really wanted her to be happy. Looking at the girl in bewilderment, the princess jumped off the sofa and asked if Embernet remembered her real name. When Jaina asked if she meant her true name, the little girl said that she did not like her true name because the names of the Visan imperial family had a mysterious power. The girl's surprise knew no bounds when the princess reported that it was because of this force that her country was destroyed. Seeing the girl's surprise, the little girl, realizing that memories were coming and going, assumed that Embernet had forgotten about his homeland. After revealing that she was the emperor of the Phelps Empire, the princess revealed that they were enemies with the Visan Empire. Noting that she was born in an enemy country that had destroyed her own, the girl, with a frightening look, said that this was precisely why she could not accept the imperial family, especially as her own. After some time, Gina, who was in the imperial family's palace, stood before the king again, who at that moment greeted her. Looking at the king, she thought that she could not even imagine that she would meet this tyrant again just 1 day later. Noting that she wanted to see him, the emperor informed her that he would have to reconsider the lady's future if she was going to make a useless request to him. Hearing this, the girl, although trying to maintain a smile, trembled with fear and could not understand why he had to threaten him right away. She herself would not like to meet him again if possible, But last night, the history of the Phelps Empire, which she found by searching the entire library, was literally hopeless. The Phelps Empire is a country that was once powerful enough to occupy half of the eastern continent, and the man who led this empire to its height was Roata, who is called the greatest general and emperor in history. But this was the end of the fate of the Phelps Empire, and while Roata lay in bed with an incurable disease, a saint appeared, possessing divine power, sent to him by God, and with him as the first emperor, the Visan Empire arose. While Visan consumed the Phelps territory using magical power, Roata could only watch as his country's history came to an end. At the same time, Roata was reborn in the Visan Empire, and as a princess, so after thinking for a bit, Gina realized that it was not at all surprising that he began to swing his sword as soon as he saw the emperor. Along with all this, looking at the emperor, the girl understood that along with this, one of the reasons was also the emperor's face. Throwing aside all unnecessary thoughts, Gina realized that there was still hope, because the emperor valued the princess very much, and in order to change something she had no other choice but to rely on him. Turning to the emperor, she noted that she had already mentioned this in a letter and said that she would like to ask about the entourage of Her Highness the Princess. Hearing this, the king became quite angry, and again beginning to show his magic, he asked if she meant, when she spoke of the surroundings, that the princess should be sent outside the palace. Upon hearing this, Gina did not quite understand what he meant, after which he informed her that if she wanted to save her life, she had better reveal her true motives. Not understanding why he had suddenly gotten so excited, she screamed in horror that this was not what she had meant at all. After composing herself, she said that she had witnessed how the servants in Her Highness's residence did not serve her properly and caused trouble. She reported that, apart from displaying disdainful attitudes and phrases, they deliberately added too much salt to the food served and left needles in the princess's clothes. Gina trembled with fear, and again confirmed her words when the emperor, rising from his seat, with an enraged look, announced that he hoped that there was not a drop of falsehood in her words. The heroine stood rooted to the spot when the king, waving his hand, ordered the execution of all those working in the princess's residence, ordered the tongues of those who spoke rudely to be cut off, and the hands of those who added salt. Having asked His Highness to wait, the heroine dared to ask him to cancel the order, because she understood that if he did this, the level of sympathy would decrease even more. She replied in a trembling voice that this was not the case at all, when the king asked if she wanted the people who had tortured his daughter to go unpunished. When the girl said that she only hoped for a replacement of the servants, since it would not be very good if the princess found out about this, the king said that everything could be kept a secret. Asking if he thought Her Majesty would never find out, Gina said that the princess probably already understood everything. Noting that Her Highness is a person who can kick out as many servants from her residence as she wants, whenever she wants, Gina speculated that the reason she hasn't done so yet is probably because the princess doesn't attach any importance to such behavior. Noting that if Her Highness learned that the emperor, her father, was going to execute these servants, the girl suggested that in that case the princess might distance herself from him. Reacting quickly, she immediately apologized when the king, having heard all this, noted how impudent it was. The girl didn't quite understand what he meant when he asked why she, knowing all this, still told him about this situation. Repeating her words that the princess did not attach importance to such things and therefore left everything as it was, the emperor noted that there was a result that she intended to achieve by turning to him. When he told her that he was interested in her true intentions, Gina didn't know what to answer, because even though she had no goal, she couldn't leave things as they were. Throwing aside unnecessary thoughts, she realized that this was a good opportunity for her, because if she didn't act now for the princess, then nothing would change. Although she was not sure that she would succeed, the heroine turned to His Highness with the words that the princess possessed incredible intelligence and strength for a child of her age, as well as excellent ingenuity and a generous character. She stated with confidence that she could not be treated like that, even if she herself simply did not care at all, that the servants were shamelessly mocking her because they considered the princess a helpless child. The girl noted that most people in childhood are completely protected and surrounded by adults, which is why they grow up without even feeling how helpless their immaturity is. At the same time, she said that she believes that this is a right that any age should have, and even if they behave like adults and are not weak at all children should still live safely and happily. Noting that although she is in the position of a playmate, Gina said that she is also the adult who is closest to the princess right now, and that is why, as long as she is around her, she will do everything in her power to keep her safe and happy. She ordered him to shut up, because it was all because of her, when the fairy said that she was so impressed that if she were a saleswoman, she would order 5 of the things she sells at once. She was pleasantly surprised when the fairy informed her that she had acquired the skill of a trickster, which relieved stress and improved her conversational skills. Remarking that it felt like they had invited a nanny rather than a playmate, the emperor noted that given her age, perhaps it was a more suitable position for her. Gina didn't quite understand what was going on when His Highness gave her permission, after which he informed her that from that moment on, she would be the princess's nanny. At this point, the fairy announced that a new quest had appeared in which she became the princess's nanny, but it could lead to death if she went against the will of her tyrant father. Looking at the window in which she was asked to either agree or refuse the quest, Gina could not understand whether this was good news. The girl said that she would remember when the emperor, noting that from now on she could dare to mention her wishes, specified that her decisions must be correct. Sometime later, entering the castle, the second prince asked His Majesty if he had heard rumors about Jaina Este, the daughter of the family guarding the greenhouse. Louis told his father that the reason for the decline of the wealthy earl's family to its current state was the medical expenses for the treatment of his daughter's illness. When the emperor noted with bewilderment that he was saying the same thing as yesterday, the prince, looking away, said that he had not listened to him properly yesterday. Walking down the corridor and lost in his thoughts, Louis was quite surprised by the fact that she would come again after yesterday's insult. Remembering her image, he could not understand how she, with a body that could fly away from a breath of wind, had the courage to tell the emperor whatever she wanted. Remembering that he had thought she was strange even at their first meeting, the guy wondered what would happen if this further shortened the time allotted to the lady. At this time, Jenna, who was in the princess's residence, was pleasantly surprised when she realized that it seemed like everyone had really been kicked out. After asking if she meant the servants, the little girl said that the knights had come and carried them all away. Asking if she was right, the girl clarified that she had said earlier that if the emperor found out about what was happening, he would definitely not turn a blind eye to it. Jenna laughed and asked if she felt any relief when the princess puffed out her cheeks and said that she didn't care at all whether they were there or not. After these words, the little girl thought, after which the fairy immediately informed Gina that the princess's level of sympathy for the tyrant emperor had increased by 25 points. Seeing this, the heroine was beside herself with happiness and was already thinking that if everything went like this, she would be able to quickly complete the task, when suddenly the princess called her. The princess reported that her father looked exactly like the first Emperor Vissen, whom she saw while she was still alive. She asked in bewilderment what would happen if this were so, when the heroine, with great surprise, asked whether this meant that she had seen the face of the first emperor. Jaina knew that Renata had been ill when the Vissen Empire was founded, so she thought that perhaps they had never met face to face. The little girl, having told him that he came on the day her castle fell, said that even now she cannot forget his face. She also said that she could not even imagine that after being reborn, she would find a father with exactly the same face as her enemy in her past life. Hearing this story, Jenna now understood what was going on, because this was exactly what she was worried about the most. Last night, the heroine found the library and learned about the fatal connection between Rote and Vissen, and when she discovered the portrait of the first Emperor Vissen, her head started spinning. All this was because the face of the current emperor was so similar to the face of the first emperor that one might think that he was his incarnation. Looking at the princess, she realized that even she would be horrified if she were reborn and met her father with a face that was the spitting image of her enemy. Jenna also understood that, moreover, this person had a long-standing grudge that could not be calculated in years, so no matter what she said now, nothing would work. Trying not to think about it, she slapped her cheeks as hard as she could, thinking that she shouldn't give up. Realizing that at such a time, it was worth generously using the quest reward, with the help of which the princess would easily fulfill the requests of the lady who had fallen, Gina immediately turned to the little girl. Asking if she wanted the lady to teach her the technique, the heroine clarified that it was so powerful that it would force adults to fulfill any will of Her Majesty. When the little girl grinned and said that she could easily achieve everything on her own, Gina, scared enough by another manifestation of magic, clarified that it was better to use a peaceful method. After the words that the more techniques she possesses, the better, the princess began to listen to the girl with curiosity, and the fairy said that at the moment the main character is under the influence of the lady who has fallen. The princess shuddered with fear when Gina screamed at the same moment and, putting her finger to her cheek, asked him to try to do it. The heroine's eyes were full of admiration, and she herself turned red when the little girl, putting her finger to her cheek, asked if she had done it correctly. When the princess asked whether this was a password or a signal, the girl said that it was a signal after which her heart could not stand it. Thinking about it, Jenna realized that the little girl might not even be disgusted by such feigned displays of affection, let alone the concept itself. Looking at the princess, who looked at her in surprise in response, she understood that in this case there was a chance that she would return to the princess from the original, even if a little different. The girl felt as if she was deceiving the little girl, but she also understood that it was the emperor and the brothers, regardless of the reason, who had left the princess in an environment where she was being bullied. When she wondered whether it was right to teach the little girl such things in order to look good in front of people, the fairy suddenly informed her that thinking too much is sometimes harmful to survival. When the girl realized that she shouldn't think about it because life was more important to her, something hit the glass and broke it, and the girl immediately jumped back and screamed in fear. Having looked closely and seen a stone in front of her, she was very surprised because she could not understand who dared to throw a stone at the princess's window. Her surprise knew no bounds when, turning around, she saw someone climbing onto the balcony, and at that moment the fairy, warning of the danger, asked the newcomer to be more careful. Looking closely, she saw a little boy, and the fairy reported that the hero, who is one of the main characters, the third brother, is showing hostility towards her. Seeing the boy and learning that he was the third prince, Gina was very surprised and scared because she understood that if her memory serves her, he was a hooligan character. She knew very well that if his brother, the second prince, was cold to others and kind only to his younger sister, then the third was like a primary school student who had not learned to communicate normally with people. Along with this, the boy was also a character who constantly argued with the main character, like a peer friend, but eventually began to care for her. Looking at the boy, Jenna knew perfectly well that despite this, he was definitely not a brother who would throw stones at his sister's window. When the boy shouted loudly towards her, trying to call her, the heroine was even more surprised, and after she asked if he was talking to her, the third prince furiously asked who she was. At the moment when Jenna tried to explain at least something, he, calling the princess a liar, reminded her of her words that no one can enter her palace. After saying that she would change her words after that, the third prince began to call her obscene words with all his anger. While Jenna, frozen in one position, was in great shock from what she heard, the little girl, in response, called him names and angrily asked him again what he had just said. Scratching her ear, the princess casually reminded him of what she had already told him, that he didn't need to pester her just because he was bored. The heroine, thinking that such little children should not swear, watched with horror as, in response to the little girl's question about how he could swear, the boy, continuing to swear, reminded her that she herself had taught him to do so. Hearing that the little girl herself had taught him this, Jenna was horrified, and the little girl, not understanding when this had happened, began to demand an explanation. When the third prince, not understanding what she was saying, shouted that he had learned this by looking at her habits, Gina, continuing to watch all this with bewilderment, turned to the two of them so that they would at least calm down a little. Continuing to ignore her, the princess, noting that you reap exactly what you sow, told him to get lost since she does not deal with children. When the fairy, having reported that the novel was moving further and further away from the cliché, said that the health of the traveler was falling, Gina was horrified because she understood how hard it was for her to gain health points, so with a loud scream, she asked them to stop arguing. When the prince, who had already calmed down a little, asked who this girl was, the princess, having said that this was her person, told him not to touch her. When the boy replied with disdain that no one was bothering her at all, his sister, noting his unkind look, said that she had already told him not to show up there. Hearing this, the third prince was greatly surprised and, noting that this was not her land, clarified that everything here belonged to their father. He announced that he also had the right to enter here when the little girl said that the emperor had given her this land, but she, laughing confidently, noted that she had warned him last time. Her brother was in great shock and did not know what to answer when the princess, showing her magical powers, asked if he was ready for the consequences since he appeared here again. Jenna immediately understood the whole situation when the boy furiously asked his sister the reason why she hated him so much. Looking at the boy, the girl saw that the level of his sympathy was almost as terrible as the level of sympathy for the emperor. She read it as obvious how a child who was rejected by his own sister without any reason would react, and she understood that the third prince, in keeping with his young and awkward age, must have revealed his feelings honestly and purely. Suddenly, Gina's attention was drawn to a flower lying near the third prince's foot, which surprised her greatly. Looking at the boy, who at that moment looked away with a sad expression, the girl suggested that perhaps the situation would be easier to fix than she had assumed. At that moment, the fairy announced that a new subquest had appeared, in which she had to host a tea party and, as a reward, receive an increase in the third brother's affection. She was very surprised and could not understand why she was suddenly answering, when suddenly the fairy confirmed her guess that the reward meant increasing the level of the princess's sympathy for the third prince. Jenna thought with bewilderment that everything had been completely different before, when the fairy said that she could answer any questions the traveler might have. Suddenly, the thought came to her mind that if there was information that she really needed to know, then the fairy would never tell it until she noticed it herself. After which Jaina realized that if she did not notice some clue and failed the quest, she could die at any moment. A shiver ran down her spine as the fairy noted that she was smiling as she looked at the newcomer. Although she didn't know what this annoying guy's goal was, the heroine understood perfectly well that everything wouldn't go the way he wanted. The third prince, asking what kind of impudence this was, asked the princess with disgust why he had taken her at all, when Gina, asking them to stop quarreling, noted that only bad children quarrel. When the princess, still continuing to swear, said not to scold her if he did not want to die, the fairy reported that the novel was continuing to deviate further and further from the cliché, and the health of the traveler would deteriorate. Realizing that this would not lead to anything good, Gina asked to show respect for her ears, and knowing full well that she had to act somehow in order not to die, she reached for the flower, noting that His Majesty had dropped it. The prince jumped back sharply and, not knowing what to say, asked her why she pretended to know everything when the heroine asked him whether he had picked this flower to give to the princess. The princess looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked why she was giving it to her, when Gina, squatting down, handed her the flower with a smile. Noting that he was handsome, the girl leaned a little closer to the princess and whispered that although she understood that she didn't like this guy, he was still a child. When she also clarified that children are very different from adults, the little girl, noting that she understood what she wanted to tell her, only said that he was just a stupid child. Jenna smiled and remarked that she hoped she realized she was even more of a child than he was, when the princess, noting how sensitive she was, said that was very unlike her. The prince and princess were quite surprised and immediately thought about it when Jenna, with a bright smile and sparkling with happiness, suggested that in that case they have a joint tea party. The heroine's joy knew no bounds when the fairy, noting that the quest had been successfully completed, reported that the level of sympathy for her third brother had risen by 5 points. At that moment, hidden in the thicket of trees, a group of people hiding behind black cloaks were developing a plan to kidnap the princess, whether alive or dead. After some time, having gathered at one table, the princess and the prince looked at each other with a displeased look, while Jenna, with a bright smile on her face, talked about what amazing weather it was today. When the fairy at that moment reported that the hit woman's health bar had been increased, the main character, although happy about it, could not understand whether it could be called a reward at all. Looking at the whole situation in front of her, Jenna just sighed heavily when she realized that even though she was making every effort, she did not feel at all that she was getting healthier. When the girl asked the third prince if he should bring her some cookies, the boy, looking at her with great displeasure, asked if she thought he would eat something like that. The prince's displeasure knew no bounds, and he only asked again about what she had just said when Gina reported that they would kick him out of here if he continued to behave like this. Realizing that she had said too much, the girl, frightened, jumped up from her chair and ran up to the little girl, after which she clarified that it would be the princess who would kick him out. Hearing this, the princess with a calm face asked the boy not to say any more bad words, arguing that she was not particularly pleased to see the child swear. When the prince, jumping up from the table, began to shout about how much younger she was, Gina at that moment asked again if he would have cookies, to which he, surprisingly this time, agreed. Sometime later, putting the tray of cookies on the table, the main character said with a smile that she had completely forgotten to say that some of these cookies were fake. When the boy asked her in confusion what she meant, the girl explained that if you were unlucky, you would get a cookie with a lot of salt, but you could try the next one. Jenna knew perfectly well that this might sound like a little game, but in reality, it was an ominous trace left by the old servants. Looking at the princess, who was telling her brother with an evil grin that he seemed to be scared, the girl realized that the princess herself seemed to be completely indifferent. Jumping up from the table and not understanding who she was talking about, the third prince shouted angrily that he simply did not want to eat, that's all. He couldn't figure out what was funny about it, and noted that it was indeed strange when his little sister asked if it wasn't funny. When the princess, hearing this, called the guy a brat who didn't really have any hair, Gina, watching her with bewilderment, asked the little girl to stop. The girl was very surprised when the boy, noting that it was the first time he had seen her take so long to answer, asked if she was really talking to him right now. When the princess calmly clarified that this could be something else, if not a conversation, the third prince was extremely surprised. At this point, the fairy, noting that the novel had become closer to the original, reported that the health of the traveler had improved. The main character did not quite understand the reason for this, because she knew perfectly well that she had done nothing. She couldn't figure out if this was a good thing when she thought about whether it meant that if she started to actively take action to make the novel closer to the original, the numbers would go up. At that moment, the boy jumped up from the table and suddenly announced that he had long been interested in learning something, after which he asked his little sister if she really liked it. When the little girl asked him with great surprise what he meant by this question, the third prince, taking a cup with many chips in his hand, clarified that this is exactly what he was talking about. He confidently agreed when the princess asked if he meant the cracks on the cup. Looking at her with horror, the prince noted that her palace was in terrible condition. The same clothes every day, and even the dishes were so old and all cracked. After explaining that this was why he thought she liked it, the boy, noting that this seemed to be true, suggested that now he had to deliberately ruin gifts. The prince could not understand why his sister did not move to another palace, so with some disdain, he assumed that it was because everything in this castle was dilapidated. Although she tried not to show it, Gina, looking at the prince with bewilderment, could not understand how he could think that someone could have such specific tastes, because at the same time, looking at the princess, one could immediately understand that she absolutely did not care. Noting that his father and brothers were right in that she really did love old things, the third prince suddenly became thoughtful. Jenna was quite surprised when the boy, looking at her with bewilderment, suddenly asked who she was. When the boy, noting that his sister had said that she was a servant, asked what she did and what family she was from, the girl introduced herself with a smile. She immediately agreed when the prince, hearing a familiar name, asked if this was the family that looked after the greenhouse. After thinking for a while, the boy suddenly noticed that she had a very unusual hair color, which he saw for the first time, and also said that in the emperor's family, everyone had sky blue hair. While Jenna was looking at her hair in bewilderment, the prince, coming a little closer with a grin, noted that he was curious about something, after which, raising his hand with a cup up, asked if he could spill a little water. The main character was amazed when she raised her head and saw a stream of water from a cup heading straight at her, while the prince himself looked at it with a sinister grin. At that moment, the princess jumped onto the table and blocked the blow, thereby protecting the girl. While Gina herself watched what was happening with great surprise, the little girl, pointing a pacifier from which many sparkling lightning bolts were emanating at her brother, told him in all seriousness not to mock an ordinary person. Hearing this, the boy looked away with great displeasure, and the main character, with the same great surprise and fear in her eyes, asked what had just happened. Having said that it was Mana, the princess, looking at her third brother, told her nanny that this boy was a magician. Gina was very surprised that the magician could be so small, but turning her gaze to the princess, she realized that there was a younger child here who, at the same time, did not watch his language. Noting that she had already warned him, the little girl, assuming that he still didn't seem to understand, took the magical pacifier into her hand again. Seeing this situation, Jenna began to assure the princess with a smile that she was really okay, when suddenly the fairy informed her that the third prince was hostile towards her. Having learned about this, the heroine fell into great bewilderment because she could not understand the reason for this at all, because she did nothing at all. She didn't know what to answer when, after the fairy warned her that the third prince was extremely hostile to the newcomer, the prince, screaming furiously, asked what she had done to his sister. Without even giving her a chance to explain, he again asked what she had done to her, that his sister was behaving like this, and at the same time, he also clarified that her family was him. After these words, there was a long silence because Jenna and the princess were very surprised by what they heard, and the boy, finally understanding what he had just said, immediately blushed with embarrassment. When the prince began to shout loudly that he had not meant it at all, the main character, pretending not to notice anything, picked up the teapot and, opening it, noticed that all the water had spilled. The prince was in great bewilderment when the girl, smiling, said that she would go and pour more water and said that the two of them needed to talk. As Jaina left the castle and went to get some water, she decided that it would be better if the two of them talked without her. The main character understood very well that the third prince, just like the second prince, felt affection for his sister. And in addition to this, she assumed that the family seemed to think that the princess wanted to live here because she liked the dilapidated place or because she was used to it. Knowing that they might have such delusions because they never really cared in their lives, she didn't take it as anything surprising, because even in the original, it all started out exactly like that, and so everyone realized what fools they were. Although she knew that she was only seeing partial memories, so she might not remember important moments, Gina knew that despite this, the current her knew something about the current Princess Rabbit. The girl knew that usually the main characters of stories about parent-child relationships who remember their past life are very active for the sake of their survival, or for some other purpose. Along with this, they inevitably develop some kind of relationship with their family, and sometimes they have to use cute tricks to maintain it. At this time, Rabbit, who, despite the fact that he was born in an enemy country, had no intention of taking revenge, because if he wanted revenge, he would have definitely started communicating with the family, and then the story would have developed. Now Rabbit looks like he's stuck in his past life and is trying to do absolutely nothing in his role as a little princess. Jenna knew perfectly well that the princess's story had stopped at the first paragraph, and only after her appearance did the pages of the book begin to turn. When the thought came to the girl's mind that the disgusting servants who should have been thrown out long ago were not here, she looked around in front of her and realized that everything here looked like ruins when it was deserted. After she accepted the fact that there was no one here except the servants, Gina suddenly stopped after a thought suddenly appeared in her head. She couldn't understand why the princess kept servants in her palace, but there were no knights. So she assumed that although every palace had them, it seemed they didn't even bother to send them here. Gina's mind immediately flashed back to the moment the baby had attacked her with her magical pacifier, but now she understood why she had been so wary, because this looked like a person whose life was in danger. All her thoughts immediately evaporated when she heard the rustling of leaves behind her, causing her to immediately turn around. Knowing that this could not be, the girl sighed with relief, because she did not understand who in their right mind could order the murder of the Princess of the Empire. When she suggested with a smile that she had probably read too many sad novels, suddenly a stranger appeared behind her and menacingly asked who she was. Jenna was amazed when she turned around and saw a man in a black cloak standing in front of her, who at that moment was saying that he had never heard of the princess having a nanny or governess. When he asked what to do with her, his allies, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, pointed out that according to the rules, witnesses cannot be spared. Jenna screamed in bewilderment because she didn't understand at all what kind of nonsense this was when the fairy reported that the little princess was really afraid of hired killers, and in the new quest, she would have to deal with the mercenaries. When the fairy reported the warning and advised her to run, the girl, looking at the mercenaries with bewilderment, could not understand where she could even run from here. She was pleasantly surprised when, after someone touched her shoulder and said that he could help, she turned around to see a smiling Embernet in front of her. Jen was amazed when, after the knight touched her hand, everything around her began to shine, and her hair was dyed the same color as Embernet's own. Seeing this situation, the mercenaries were no less surprised, and screaming in horror, they could not assume anything other than that it was magic. when one of them, noting that they seemed to be just going to stare, pulled out a sword and ran up to the girl, she immediately blocked the blow with magic. While the mercenary himself was even more surprised after such a rebuff, the fairy informed the heroine that thanks to her foresight, the hit girl's skill level had increased to level 2. Gina listened in bewilderment to the fairy's words that unique abilities were unlocked, and now she could use the power of the possessed soul for health points. At this time, when one of the mercenaries reported that this girl was a swordswoman who used mana, the other was quite surprised by his words, because according to their information, there should not have been any knights here. When the fairy started the timer, saying that the power could be used for a minute, Jenna, feeling this power, assumed that this was the same knight who appeared to her last time. At the same time, she also felt that something was definitely wrong, because her body was not moving on its own, and it seemed to her as if she did not know how to move. Knowing full well that she would not be able to cope with all these people in 1 minute, the girl, clutching the kettle with both hands, realized that she needed to figure out how to escape from here as quickly as possible. Swinging that same teapot with all her fury, she used magic to direct mana at all the mercenaries at once. Everyone watched in horror as she dealt with them one by one, and with a loud scream for them to leave her, she angrily announced that she did not want to see them. With less than 15 seconds left on the timer, Gina was reassuring herself that everything would be okay if she could escape to Rabbit's location, when suddenly one of the mercenaries appeared out of nowhere and presented a sword filled with magic to her. The heroine's surprise knew no bounds when he, looking at her with a fierce gaze, announced that this was the end, while there were only 5 seconds left on the timer. When the fairy announced that the skill's effect had ended, Gina, coughing loudly, immediately fell to her knees, and her appearance returned to its original state. Looking at her from above, the mercenary, noting that although he did not know what family she was from, said that he still could not leave her alive. Jenna was amazed when a man suddenly appeared and slipped between her and the mercenary, after which the mercenary immediately flew back. She cried out with joy when she turned around and saw the princess standing in front of her, who was saying at that moment that she was pouring water for too long. Turning to the side, the princess saw one of the mercenaries trying to escape with great fear in his eyes, which did not make her very happy. At that moment, after the symbol appeared in the sky, the prince fell on that same mercenary, who, looking at him with bewilderment, began to ask who he was. While the fairy was talking about how the sudden quest had been completed, and as a reward, the health of the newcomer had increased, the prince began to ask with interest who all these people were, and whether Lady Esta had really defeated them all herself. When he suggested with a smile that the lady was not so simple since she knew how to fight, the princess immediately stopped him, and, noting that his eyes seemed to be for decoration, said that Gina was wounded. At the moment when Jaina herself was mentally asking for them not to quarrel, the third prince, approaching one of the mercenaries, suddenly focused his attention on his clothes. The main character was extremely surprised when, after the princess said that there was nothing special about these clothes, the boy suddenly suggested that they were most likely hired killers. Thinking about it, she realized that this was true, because she remembered that they were in the original, because for some reason the dark forces were targeting the princess. The girl knew perfectly well that the main character of the original kept this a secret, because she was afraid that her family would hate her. When she started thinking about what was going on in this case, the fairy suddenly announced that the lady who had been hit was unable to adapt to the sudden change in her health, so she would soon faint, which she was not at all happy about. At this point, when the princess announced that they were just people who came to play, her brother, asking if he looked like an idiot, asked if she thought he would really believe it. The princess was horrified when she realized that this annoying guy really understood, and the prince, seeing such a reaction and finally admitting that they really were hired killers, could not understand what kind of psychos would break into the princess's garden. He found it unthinkable when his sister told him that they often came here and then asked why they were targeting her. When she said that if she knew this herself, she would decide everything herself, the prince, starting to shout that this could not be left like this, said that they must immediately tell everything to their father. Watching them continue to quarrel, Gina understood from the outside that in this atmosphere she could not say that she wanted to go home, but she did not know how she was supposed to leave the princess's palace in 30 seconds. At that moment, the princess suddenly turned her gaze to her, after which she said with a smile that, fortunately, this time she managed to save her subordinate. Hearing Embernet shed tears at the words spoken, Gina only smiled before thanking Princess Rabbit for saving her. Turning her gaze to the prince, she also thanked him, after which he asked in surprise what she was thanking him for. Noting that he had caught the killer trying to escape, Gina smiled and said that he looked like a real hero. Looking away, the prince said that she was also amazing, and her skills were quite good, and also asked if she had studied fencing. When Jenna tried to answer his question by saying that it was not so, the fairy suddenly said that time was up and she was about to faint, after which the girl began to cough up blood. She tried to answer that this was not the case, when the frightened prince, asking her what was the matter, suggested that she had been hit by a sword, while the princess watched the situation with great bewilderment. At this moment, the fairy reported that the main character, the princess, was confused and was beginning to confuse her past life with reality. The little girl immediately ran up to the girl and with horror in her eyes began to call her and ask her not to leave, after which the fairy reported that the novel was moving away from the cliché. Realizing that the baby needed to be calmed down somehow, Jenna tried to say something but realized that she had no voice. Having fallen to the floor, she could not even imagine what would happen if everything continued like this, when suddenly a voice was heard in the distance calling the princess. Realizing that she had heard this voice, Gina, right before she lost consciousness, mentally asked that this person was not her hallucination and that he would take care of Rabbit. After some time, when she opened her eyes in an unfamiliar room, the fairy immediately reported that magic had been received and she was freed from the state of fainting. She cried out in surprise because she had no idea what had happened while she was unconscious, when, noting that the quest was about to be completed, the fairy reported that the sympathy level had reached almost 90%. She was very surprised when she saw the second prince in front of her, who noted that she had finally woken up. Jumping out of bed, Jaina greeted His Highness, but when she began to say the necessary words, the prince, without even letting her finish, said that he did not need greetings and only asked how she was feeling. When the girl awkwardly said that she seemed fine, the guy asked in confusion why she said it with a questioning intonation. Jaina was quite surprised when the prince, noting that the healer mage had taken care of her, reported that she should have recovered to some extent. Hearing this, she now understood why everything happened quickly this time, because the last time she woke up only after several days. The second prince was quite surprised, but he didn't show it when the girl thanked him with a smile for curing her. When Jaina asked with a smile whether she could go home in that case, the guy, heading for the exit, noted that she was a very strange person. The girl was very surprised when he stopped at the door and told her to come when she got better, after which the prince explained that his sister had asked him to convey these words to her. When Jaina asked if the princess was okay and if she was too scared, the prince said that he had never seen her scared, when suddenly a smile appeared on his face. As he was carrying the unconscious Gina, his sister called out to him without any address and asked if he was holding her properly. Noting that he was her older brother, the guy said that he was holding her properly and the princess could go to the palace. The little girl was petrified with shock when, after she said that she would go with them, her brother asked if she would go with them even if her slow steps delayed the lady's treatment. Seeing this reaction, the third prince said that his brother was only saying this because he was worried that it would be hard for her, and then asked his brother if this was true. Having agreed, the guy said that her feet were too small, and the third prince, hearing this, became quite angry because of such unnecessary clarifications. After hearing this, the princess lowered her head, after which she calmly noted that Jenna had hurt herself while protecting her. With a loud cry, she announced that they had to help her, saying that otherwise the face of the imperial family would be disgraced in front of the count, who had sent Gina as a nanny. In response to this, the second prince merely informed her that she did not have to say this, and that it was enough to simply ask for help. When his sister asked why this was so, the prince replied with a smile that she was his younger sister, and he always hoped that a day like today would come someday. Rabbit was very surprised to hear these words, after which, looking away, she noted that he turned out to be a good guy, in response to which the guy said that, at least for her, it would always be like this. Noting that in that case she would return to herself, the princess joyfully ran with words for him to tell Gina to come again when she recovered. As the second boy watched his sister run away, he thought that Joel Rabbit Weason had always been a special and unique child. However, she had a strange manner of speaking, and her early awakened divine power was so strong that it amazed everyone. However, despite all this, his sister built a wall around herself and did not let anyone in, including her own family. As she continued to behave in this manner, the third prince came to the conclusion that she hated everyone, and the eldest brother, noting that although what she wanted was questionable, said that they should still follow her wishes. Even the king himself eventually decided to remove all the knights from the princess's residence, and the family members finally gave in one by one and stopped trying to get closer to Yuel. Even the second prince himself thought that it would always be like this. However, the child who was so cautious that he even avoided his family, with whom he was related by blood, opened his heart to someone for the first time. In all this man turned out to be an unfamiliar lady whom he himself had seen for no more than a week. All this had aroused great suspicion in him from the very beginning, and even now he did not quite understand the reasons, but on the other hand, he was still glad about what had happened. After watching his sister leave and smiling at Lady Este, the guy said that he would definitely convey these words to her. Sometime later, when Gina, having fully recovered, came to the imperial palace again, the princess greeted her with a radiant smile. When the little girl, noting that she thought she would be staggering for several days, said that she still had willpower, the girl, laughing, said that it was all thanks to the fact that the second prince called a magician healer. Hearing this, the princess was quite surprised, but after thinking a little, she noted that it was true. Noticing such a reaction, Jenna turned to the little girl in surprise, after which the princess said that, as it turned out, he was not a bad guy at all. When she also noted that she would not have known about this if it were not for Jenna, and it was all thanks to her, the girl immediately blushed with embarrassment. After the main character asked the fairy if she could see the progress window, the fairy immediately said that it was possible and a game window appeared in front of her. Jenna's joy knew no bounds when she realized that the notification window that popped up yesterday as soon as she woke up was not a hallucination, although she did not know how it happened. Suddenly, a thought came into her head, after which she assumed that perhaps this was the right path. She knew perfectly well that from the very beginning there were only people around Rabbit who insulted her, and her supposed family ignored what was happening and no one helped her. Looking at the little girl and not understanding why she should try to act cute to get closer to people, Gina realized that in this situation, it was the Emperor and her brothers who should act cute. Now the main character understood that from the very beginning it was necessary not to try to change Rabbit, but to change the perception of the princes and the Emperor. Thinking about this, Jenna now knew perfectly well that if she had not come into this world, then these people would have moved away from the cliché and would have become distant from each other forever. Recalling yesterday's events, she also focused on the fact that the fairy told her that Rabbit was confusing his past life with reality. At the same time, the little girl does not want to come face to face with reality so much that she wants to be cut off from it forever. Despite this, the girl knew perfectly well that her new life had already begun, and she could not live like this for the rest of her time because people must live in the present. Previously, Gina had received orders to increase the princess's level of sympathy in the family, but Gina herself realized that this could only be achieved after Rowata was ready to live as Rabbit. The girl knew perfectly well what was needed so that instead of Rote, filled with loneliness and sadness, the baby would begin to live like Rabbit, whose life is full of laughter and happiness. When Jenna turned to the princess with a bright smile on her face and asked if they could go on a picnic, the girl was very surprised. When the princess asked in bewilderment whether this was how children today had fun, the girl said that the princess herself was too young to judge today's children in such a manner. Trying to make a puppy dog look, Jenna said that she wanted to go to that blooming place with Her Majesty, taste some goodies, and take a walk. When the princess said that this could be done in her garden, the girl, trying to look even cuter, noted that there weren't many flowers in Her Majesty's garden and said that she wasn't asking to go right now. The princess clarified whether people would really agree to fulfill her request. When asked why she was doing such a pose, the girl said that it was necessary in order to increase the chance that she would agree to her request. Having said that, the nicer the request, the higher the chance, Gina decided to clarify whether she was coming, in response to which the princess reported that she had a feeling that her wrist would break if she just touched it. The heroine was amazed when the little girl suddenly asked if she was asking this because she wanted to know if it worked on the prince. Not understanding which of the two princes she was talking about, the girl began to talk about the merits of the crown prince, when suddenly Gina, with a loud cry, asked her to stop. Asking her not to misunderstand, she told him with horror in her eyes that she had never even spoken to the crown prince. The girl asked loudly what was wrong with her taste because her feelings were now being neglected when the princess, having clarified whether this was the second prince, noted that she had a rather unusual taste. When the princess asked in bewilderment if the guy looked too cold, the girl cried out that such cold, handsome men were popular in their time. The girl chuckled and said that she didn't see him as a romantic object when the little girl replied that she wouldn't dissuade him since that was her taste. She cried out in surprise and said that this could not be, when Her Majesty, after thinking a little, said that she could not say that the second prince would be against it. With tears in her eyes, she asked him not to speak so carelessly, because she understood perfectly well that there was already complete chaos here, and she could not imagine what would happen to her health skills if she, a minor character, started an affair with the prince. Trying to change the subject, Jenna asked the little girl if she wanted to do something else or get something since she didn't want to go to the picnic. When the princess, after thinking for a moment, said that she didn't really want anything, Gina declared with complete pride that she shouldn't refuse and at least think about it because she was her nanny and it was her duty to do whatever Her Majesty wanted. Looking away, the princess said that she was strange, and although she initially called her by her name, Embernet, she immediately corrected herself, calling her by her correct name. Jenna beamed with happiness when the little girl, noting that she hadn't thought about it before, said that she would think about it anyway, since she said so. She was greatly perplexed and did not know what to answer when the princess said that in that case she wanted to get the sword. Her Highness stated with complete seriousness that she sometimes missed the war and the battles that took place, in response to which the girl with a stone face asked her to stop. The little girl calmly said that she knew this very well when Jenna turned to her and said that she would not be able to start a war with her. With eyes full of delight, Rabbit said that she wanted so many swords that she could fill the entire room. Looking at the girl with bewilderment, Jaina could not decide whether it would be right to fulfill such a wish, because a pile of swords on the main character of a novel about raising a child would look very strange. The heroine seemed to be pierced by an electric current, and she loudly shouted that she would immediately collect the swords of this entire world, when suddenly the little girl, with a puppy-like look and a cute pose, asked again if her wish could be fulfilled. After some time, the Chamberlain of the Western District, who was in charge of all the palaces in the West, including the princess's palace, came to their room and asked if they had summoned him. Looking at him, Gina was perplexed, as she did not understand at all why he was empty-handed, because she had definitely said to bring swords, no matter which ones. She looked at him with displeasure when he reported that he had heard that they wanted something. Not understanding what was wrong with his manner of speech, the girl could only assume that he apparently did not know the reason why all the maids and servants had recently been exiled from this palace. Suddenly, a thought came into her head, after which she suggested that it might be something like the minor villain that always takes control in the first chapter of a novel, regardless of the genre. Realizing that she would not let this go, Jenna stated with complete confidence that he was right and she was calling him out. He looked at her in bewilderment, because he did not quite understand what was being discussed when the girl said that she wanted him to bring the swords. When the heroine suggested that chamberlains were now being taught to interrogate those they served about their orders, the man said that he did not dare bring such a dangerous object as a sword into the residence of Her Highness the Princess. While the princess watched the whole situation with little enthusiasm, Gina clarified that it was an order from Her Highness that he had mentioned, and then asked what kind of attitude this was. Hearing this, the man asked what Her Highness, who was only 3 years old, could possibly know, and with a grin he clarified that this could only have happened if she herself had intimidated and forced the naive princess. After these words, the princess immediately pulled out her magic pacifier, but Jaina, seeing this, immediately stopped her. Changing her displeased expression, the girl whispered to Her Highness with a smile that she should rely on her. Rabbit was very surprised after such words, and Gina herself at that moment asked the man if he knew who she was, since he was showing such disrespect. After telling her that she was the princess's playmate, he grinned and noted that it was very unusual for a playmate to be so old. After clarifying that she had been appointed as Her Highness's nanny, Gina stated with all seriousness that, in order to protect the princess, depending on the case, she had powers equivalent to those of the imperial family. Hearing this, the chamberlain shuddered with horror, and refusing to believe it, said that he had not been informed of this. Without even letting him finish speaking, Gina, covering her grin with her hand, informed him that in that case he could go and personally confirm that she had been appointed by His Majesty, the Emperor. Quite frightened, the man began to apologize for his words and said that he would immediately carry out her instructions. The princess looked at Gina in surprise, who, noting that it was a great relief that he was quick on the uptake, asked the princess for confirmation. After explaining that she had previously thought that Jenna was just a lost rabbit, the little girl said that, as it turned out, she was a rabbit with sharp fangs who would not lose to just anyone. Sometime later, looking at all the swords with admiration, the princess spoke in amazement about the progress and that Visen's swords had become longer, which made them more stunning. When she grabbed one of the swords and told Gina to look at it, the girl, scared enough, asked her to be careful, because this sword was too big. Having stated that this was not the case at all, the princess, whose eyes were filled with great enthusiasm, was surprised that she did not know the full charm of this sword. Looking at her with a smile, Gina understood that the princess was very happy, and she should have asked her about it earlier. At that moment, the little girl herself called her and, having said that she was very happy, she thanked the girl with a smile, who, upon hearing this, had tears in her eyes. At this moment, having flown into the room through the window with the help of magic, the third prince reported that he heard something strange, and was also quite surprised when he saw Lady Esta. Not understanding who allowed him to do this, the princess told him not to climb through the window, but her brother only said that it was not important at all now. When he approached the lady again with the question, she also informed him that it was forbidden to climb into the house through the window, which took him by surprise. He was very surprised and immediately thought about it when the girl asked him a question about what would happen if Her Highness took him for a hired killer. When he said that he would think about it next time, the princess, hearing this, told him to simply not come. Just as he wanted to report that he saw weapons being carried towards her, he immediately saw them behind him, and, horrified, asked if she was preparing for war. Having reported that the swords were brought because Her Highness the Princess wanted them, Gina asked him with a frightening look whether it was really beautiful. Horrified but trying not to show it, the boy said that it looked very beautiful. Having noted this as true, the girl asked the princess with a smile whether she had heard that the third prince also liked swords, in response to which the little girl with a smile said that he had taste. When the fairy reported that the princess's level of sympathy towards the third prince had increased, Jaina was pleasantly surprised to hear this. Unexpectedly, the third prince suddenly turned to the lady with a question about what she had just said, which surprised her quite a bit, because she did not quite understand the essence of the question. When she reported that she had called Her Highness Rabbit, to his question about how she had just addressed his sister, the boy with complete confidence declared that she should call him by his name too. Jaina was very surprised by such a request, so she asked with bewilderment what to call him, in response to which the third prince said that his name was Noah. The heroine hesitated when she heard this, so she clarified that people only call each other by name when they are very close. Noting that she called the princess by her first name, the boy said that it was for this very reason that she should also call him by his first name. Coming a little closer to the lady, Noah whispered that if he got closer to her, then perhaps he would be able to get closer to the princess. Jenna was pleasantly surprised to hear this, so she said that if that was the case, she would be happy to help him. When at that moment the fairy reported that the princess's level of sympathy for the third prince had increased again, the lady, looking at the girl in surprise, realized that she had heard everything. Smiling, asking if he should also call the lady by her name, the third prince asked if her name was Lalin. She reported with bewilderment that she herself was asking herself this question when the prince, having learned that her name was Gina, asked why the princess then called her Lolin. After thinking for a bit, and assuming that it was something like a cute nickname, Noah said with a smile that in that case, he would also call her that. In a whisper, the boy, having first said that if she helped him spend time with his sister, shouted out that, of course he was not asking for it for free. Hearing this, Gina was very surprised, and the third prince, declaring that she was too weak, said that he would protect her from now on. Reminding her that she had fainted while merely confronting a couple of assassins, Noah proudly stated that moving was clearly not her thing. Although Jaina knew very well that her body was indeed weak, she could not understand why he said that because she had defended herself quite well against those assassins. Telling her that she was like a newly born canary, the third prince shouted that he would protect her if she fulfilled his request. The boy shuddered in surprise when his sister, hearing this, asked in bewilderment what request he was talking about. When Gina, seeing the boy's reaction, told the princess that His Highness had asked her to call him by his name, Noah shouted out that this was so. Hearing this, the princess thought about it and asked if this was too much of a price, to which her brother replied that this lady was very weak. Pointing to Gina, who was quite surprised at this point, he informed her that she was even weaker than the canary he had looked after as a child. The main character continued to watch with her mouth open as the princess agreed with his words, and he was pleasantly surprised that he wasn't the only one who thought she did. Jenna understood that she should be happy, but for some reason she couldn't, when after the princess's words that her opinions with her brother were converging for the first time, and she was starting to like him, the fairy reported that her sympathy had increased. After hearing this, a smile appeared on the third prince's face, and he proudly declared that although he didn't know about the rest, he always treated the weak with respect. Gina knew perfectly well that his words were a lie, because just recently he had thrown a water bomb at her for no apparent reason. The princess, smiling brightly, said that she liked it, and also said that it was the standard of an outstanding knight. When the third prince asked her in confusion what she meant by the word standard, Rabbit replied that she meant that he was a good guy. The boy was pleasantly surprised to hear these words, and at that moment the fairy reported that this was indeed true. After some time, when Gina and the children went on a picnic, the princess's level of sympathy towards the third prince continued to increase. When evening came, the main character, turning her gaze from the book to the children, was pleasantly surprised, and a smile appeared on her face. The prince and princess, exhausted after such a busy day, slept soundly next to each other. A little while later, heading towards the castle, the princess asked Jenna if she had to leave, in response to which the girl asked if she would be staying for a little while longer. After stating that the nanny usually stayed around all day, Rabbit noted with a sad look that she always returned home. After telling her that it was all because of her weak body, Gina immediately said that it was in the past when she saw the princess's great surprise. The girl said that this is why her parents are worried about her, and she must undergo a medical examination every day, in connection with which His Majesty the Emperor allowed her to go home. When she started talking about another nanny if the princess needed someone to stay with her all day, Rabbit shouted out that she didn't need anyone else. Noting that this was a pretty good reason, since it was a matter of health, the little girl proudly said that she was a very generous person. She told him to get lost with a menacing smile when Noah, after asking if she was afraid to be alone, asked if he should stay with her. Jenna was very surprised when she suddenly saw the silhouette of a man in the distance, and looking closer, she realized that it was the second prince. When she began to say words of greeting, he immediately told her that this was enough and they could go. Hearing this, the girl happily agreed and asked permission to deviate, when suddenly the guy, without even letting her finish, said that he meant that he would go with her. Jenna was extremely confused, because she couldn't understand at all why he was with her, because she was going home, when suddenly the princess appeared behind her. Having praised the guy, calling him a brother, Rabbit proudly told him to see her off like a man should. While the girl was in great bewilderment after hearing the princess call him brother, the third prince, with a stony face, said that she probably meant to see her off not as a man, but as a gentleman. When the princess said with a smile that it all depended on how you looked at it, Gina was even more surprised, because she could not understand what had happened during the time she had fainted. A couple of minutes later, heading towards the exit with the prince, Gina could not understand what kind of situation this was, and how they came to this. When the second prince suddenly announced that he had ordered the carriage to be prepared in advance, the girl, having apologized in advance, asked if he had come here specifically because of her. She said that this was not the case, and she was simply confused when the prince, with a frightening look, clarified that there were some problems with this too. Laughing awkwardly, Gina said she hoped he hadn't had to wait for her, to which the prince responded that she shouldn't worry about it, and said he had gone out when he received word that she was leaving. The girl was very surprised by this, and the guy, saying that it would probably be better for her to know about this, said that when she was fainting, she and her sister made a promise. She couldn't believe her ears when she learned that Rabbit had allowed one Shadow Knight to be housed in her residence. Looking at the princess's sympathy level for her second brother, which was just over 80%, Gina realized that something had indeed happened between them that had caused the sympathy level to rise sharply. Noting that it was all her merit, the prince reported that his sister said that if it were not for Jenna, she would never have spoken to him. Having said that he, to be honest, had himself given up on the idea, he also said that he felt that it was not worth approaching her. Although he found it regrettable, the boy accepted the fact that without this girl he would not have been able to get closer to his sister, and he would not have been able to become a Shadow Knight and see what was happening. Gina was quite surprised to hear this, because she understood what it meant, in response to which the second prince, noting that they had agreed that he would assign a Shadow Knight to his sister, said that there was no talk of it being him. Not understanding how he came up with the idea of becoming a Shadow Knight himself, Jennu was frightened by the fact that the prince resembled his own sister's stalker. Suddenly, a thought came into the girl's head, and when she realized that he could hear all the conversations with Rabbit, she was horrified. She calmed down a little when the prince, deciding to add something, said that although he saw what was happening, the distance was large enough to hear the conversations. At the same time, he reported that despite this, he even understood that Jenna was sincere even more than one could have supposed, as she told His Majesty that day. Instantly, memories of the lady stating with determination that she would do everything in her power to ensure that Her Highness was safe and happy came to his mind. The prince could not understand how she was capable of this, because he understood that when a person knows that he has little time left, he usually tries to live for himself. Knowing full well that it was not easy to sacrifice the rest of one's life for someone else, the prince understood that this still did not mean that this lady looked like a saint from the temple who generously gifted everyone. Jenna's words about trying to sort out the feelings she had before suddenly popped into his head, and he thought about it. The girl was horrified when the guy suddenly told her that when they first met, her rudeness was outrageous. At the same time, he also reported that he seemed to have jumped to conclusions and behaved inappropriately, and, turning away out of embarrassment, asked to forget what he had said then. At that moment, the fairy announced that Lewis's sympathy rating had increased, and now the lady traveler had the opportunity to pave a new route in the form of her own romantic fantasy. The very next day, when the sun was shining brightly in the sky, the maid, asking her miss to finally get up, said that she had had enough of lying around. When a half-asleep Jenna asked to sleep for 10 minutes, the girl shouted that the hour at which she asked to be woken up had long passed. Jenna was so surprised that she immediately jumped out of bed when the fairy suddenly announced that the second and third prince's sympathy level had exceeded 90%, and the conditions of the main quest had now been achieved. The maid was quite surprised when the lady, not at all understanding what had happened in her absence since yesterday, said that she must go to the palace at once. At that moment, Paolo appeared at the door, and seeing that his sister had woken up, he noted that there had been a commotion here since early morning. Not understanding what he was doing there and why he wasn't at work, Jenna asked him not to say that he was waiting for her to go together, in response to which the guy with a smile told her not to even dream about it. Noting that she had passed out the moment she arrived yesterday, Paolo handed her a letter, telling her that it was from Lilith Trisha. Jenna was quite devastated to hear this, and her brother explained to her that Lilith was very upset that she had not been able to meet her lately, so she should definitely write to her when she had time. After thinking for a bit, the girl realized that she had been so focused on Rabbit that she hadn't seen her friend for a long time. When she asked her brother why he had the letter and suggested that they were in contact, Paolo asked her in response who she thought had met Lady Trichet in her absence. Jenna was amazed when, at that moment, she suddenly saw out of the corner of her eye how the bracelet began to glow, but when she looked at it, she saw nothing. Turning her gaze to her brightly smiling brother, she could not understand whether she had really imagined it. Already in the castle, Rabbit angrily screamed about why she was running around like that and not thinking about her body at all. When Gina wanted to say something in response, the princess, without even letting her say anything, forbade her to justify herself. The girl didn't know what to say when the little girl, having said that she wouldn't just scrape her knees like others if she fell, clarified that her bones would break. A little later, while in the garden, Gina suddenly decided to ask about what happened in the morning, and asked the princess if something had happened between her and the princes. She asked in horror what they had been talking about, when the princess, after thinking for a moment and looking away, said that they had seen each other in the morning. When Rabbit said that she would not tell her about it, Jenna was quite surprised because she did not understand the reason. Tears came to the girl's eyes, and she didn't even know what to answer, when, after she noted that she was her subordinate, the princess said that it was not necessary to tell everything to subordinates. When the girl wanted to suggest something about their relationship, because she noticed that all the swords in the living room had disappeared, the princess said that Lewis helped move them, Hearing her call her second brother by name, the girl was very surprised, and the princess herself, ignoring her, also reported that he said that the chamberlain responsible for her housing would be replaced. Along with this, the princess announced that her personal maid and servants would also arrive soon, which Jaina was pleasantly surprised by, since the second prince had put in a lot of effort. When the girl agreed with her, the girl thought about it because she understood that the reason for the increase in sympathy was only this. The princess reported that the guy had gone to take the test when Jaina, having reported that she thought that His Highness the Prince would be with his sister, noted that for some reason he was not there today. When Rabbit told her that members of the imperial family had to show off their achievements to the emperor once a month, the girl thought that the princess should do it too, but the girl reassured her that she shouldn't do it because she was only 3 years old. The little girl reported that despite this, she had already passed it once, and on that day it became clear that she possessed sacred powers. Jaina was horrified when the princess also told her that on that day she had also pierced that scoundrel emperor. She reported that this was probably the reason when Rabbit reported that he then called her to his office and informed her that she was not yet qualified. Here a question arose in Jaina's head, after which she asked the princess how it became known about her power if she almost never leaves the palace. She realized that this moment was in the original when the girl told her that when she had the power of Visen, she felt it for the first time in the temple. Lost in thought, the girl remembered that the story around the temple was the main conflict, and also in the banquet hall there was a man who looked like a priest. When she remarked that she did not know about this temple, the princess said that the temple of Visen was a separate place, so it was not surprising that she did not know about it. The princess said that several decades ago, the saint, who appears at best once every 100 years, was brutally killed, so the power of the temple no longer leaks out. Although Jenna remembered something about the temple from the original, she couldn't remember everything exactly, so she decided to just guess. She knew very well that the villains in novels are often representatives of the imperial family or temples, and if the main character is an archduke, he is a representative of the imperial family, and if the main character is a member of the imperial family, he is a temple. Jaina couldn't figure out for sure if this was the reason why the princess in the original story suffered from possible kidnappings, threats, and attempts to lure her to her side. After thinking for a while, she realized that if she looked at it from the perspective of a temple that had lost a saint, the appearance of a little princess with holy power was like a real gift. At the same time, from the outside, Rabbit appears to be nothing more than a child who is mistreated by the imperial family. All her thoughts were confused, and she cried out in surprise when footsteps were heard behind them. Turning around, they saw a guy dressed in a priest's clothes who, after greeting Her Majesty, asked her if she remembered him. Crying out in surprise and asking who he was, Jaina could not understand how he got here, because there were probably many knights on guard. When the princess asked with great bewilderment who he was, the guy apologized to her and noted that he was late with the introduction. After stating that he was one of the 5 high priests of the temple, he clarified that he was the 3rd servant of Lord Ibaton, and his name was Rondo. With a smile on his face, he began to say that she did not remember anything because she was still young, when the princess, with a terrifying look, said that she did not know anyone like him. Without even letting him finish speaking, Rabbit said that she was not going to recognize him in the future and called him a fool. At that moment, Jaina, covering the princess with her body, clarified that he was a priest and said that no matter who he was, no one could come in here without Her Highness's permission, so he had to leave. When the man asked who this beauty was, she said that she was Her Highness's nanny, and there would be only one warning. When the girl asked if he had received permission, he said that there was nothing superfluous in the disposal of the word of God, and there was no place that the steps of God could not reach. With all pride, the man declared that God had brought him there by divine power to take the place of the servant who had served her. Surprised that he had entered here without permission, Jaina could not understand how he dared to intrude into the residence of a member of the imperial family as if nothing had happened. While Jaina was wondering in disbelief that he probably thought that she and Rabbit posed no threat, the princess was already fully prepared for battle. The girl was extremely surprised when at that moment the fairy announced a new additional quest where she had to stop the plan of the villain from the crowd while leaving him alive. She could not understand what kind of quest she would ask to save the villain, but at the same time she understood perfectly well that she herself did not want the princess to kill anyone, so she would throw him out of here herself. Turning to Embryone, she asked if this was possible, after which her appearance changed again. At this moment, the man, having said that the princess was a truly great person and a treasure of the temple who would save the empire and the entire continent, noted that such an old place of residence was not suitable for Her Majesty. With a smile on his face, he began to ask the princess what she thought about being in the place they had prepared with a cozy bed, new clothes, and a delicious dinner specially prepared for her. Shouting out that he was going to kidnap Her Highness, Gina announced that she, as a nanny, would not just sit idly by. Having informed her that she was more of a puppet sent by His Majesty, the man asked if this was proof of his intention to simply watch from the sidelines without showing due affection, since otherwise there was no reason to use a girl who would soon die. Jenna immediately pushed away his hand, reaching for the princess, and asking him to be careful with his words, noted that Princess Rabbit already received more love than anyone. Putting his hand to his chest, the swindler shouted that this was impudence and asked how she dared to treat a high-ranking priest like that. While he continued to shout about the punishment that would befall her, Jaina picked up the stick from the floor and filled it with mana. When the fairy said that the hit girl's skill was activated and could be used within a minute, the girl immediately attacked the swindler. The man was very surprised that the nanny wielded a sword, but he managed to react in time and put a shield in front of himself. Jenny was surprised when she realized that her attack was reflected by the shield, and the deceiver, breathing heavily, began to shout that all her actions were useless because this was a sacred power granted by God. Feeling the energy of her sword being blocked, Gina doubted whether she could handle it as the power was too excessive. Her surprise knew no bounds when the voice of Embernetu inside her suddenly told her to use the power of destruction that was passed down through the Phelps family. He also told her that she was descended from a demonic beast and was a destructive force capable of destroying the divine. Hearing this, the girl, although pleasantly surprised, still did not understand at all how she could use this power. She immediately came to her senses and cast aside all unnecessary thoughts when the princess, with a loud cry, told her to concentrate. When she concentrated, the fairy congratulated her on the awakening of the soul ability and said that thanks to this power, the skill level had increased and the third level hit skill had been activated. Concentrating all her strength on her sword, or rather her stick, Gina hit the swindler with all her might, who flew to the floor with great force. While Jaina stood in great shock from what she saw, the princess, looking at the whole situation with no less surprise, said that she really missed this power of destruction. Trembling with fear, the man did not know what to answer or how to justify himself now when Jenna approached him, when suddenly the necklace on his neck lit up. Looking at him, covered in trembling in his body, Gina and the princess noticed his necklace, and not understanding what it was, decided not to approach him. At this moment, the crown prince and the second prince came into the garden, and upon seeing the blood, they immediately asked what had happened here. Jenna was very surprised when she looked up and saw the crown prince standing in front of her. Smiling, he said that it had been very difficult to resist the urge to come here, and noted that it seemed like the heavens had finally heard his prayers and given him a reason. When Lady Esta began her greeting, he, saying that it was enough, informed her that she was the person chosen by his dear sister, and therefore worthy of respect. Gina realized that compared to the tyrant emperor and his younger brothers, the second prince and Noah, the crown prince was a handsome man with a soft image. Despite this, she knew very well that in the original, the crown prince definitely gave the impression of being a gray cardinal, and not towards the main character, but towards her enemies. With an embarrassed look on his face and tears in his eyes, the crown prince began to call out sweetly to his little sister and ask if she was hurt. Gina, standing with the second prince, watched as he continued to coo at his sister, asking her if she wanted to say hello to her little brother, whom she hadn't seen for 3 whole months. Looking at this, the lady realized that perhaps he was the most typical example of an older brother from a child-rearing novel. At this point, the second prince, who noticed the wound on her hand, noted that every time he met the lady, she would get 1 or 2 new wounds. Not understanding what he was talking about, Gina reported that Her Highness was completely fine and not hurt, and also noted that she protected her simply perfectly. Hearing this, Louis became embarrassed, although he did not want to show it, and said that this was not what he meant at all. The girl was pleasantly surprised when at that moment the fairy, having reported that the quest was completed, noted that the hit girl's health had increased, and she had received a new passive skill. Having carefully looked at the new skill and having seen some strange name-hidden piece, she became confused when suddenly the fairy informed her that it was a hidden part. Realizing that she was an idiot for thinking that she would get a normal answer from a fairy, the lady assumed that this was most likely a hidden quest or some kind of reward. All her thoughts were dispelled, and she herself was quite surprised when the prince, taking her by the shoulder, asked if she was seeing him. After stating that she was, of course, listening to him, she remarked on how relieved she was that everything had ended well, and clarified that Her Highness had not been harmed when the prince asked what exactly the relief was. Jenna didn't understand what he meant when Louis suddenly asked if that meant it wouldn't matter if she got hurt herself. While the girl continued to look at him in surprise, the guy turned around and said that the bleeding needed to be stopped and medicine applied. Looking up, he began to watch in bewilderment as the princess, with great anger, told her heir to leave here, while he, continuing to smile, said that even today there were stars sparkling in her eyes. Jenna watched this situation with a smile and thought that he was truly an amazing person, but her expression immediately changed when suddenly the princess, continuing to tell him to leave, said that he himself said that they should not see each other. When the crown prince, having stated that there were reasons for this, said that he was very glad that she remembered her brother's words, the girl turned to the second prince in surprise, after which he said that he could not answer anything. He asked if she had meant to ask what her brother's words meant when she noted that she had not said anything yet. Lost in her thoughts, Gina realized that the princes must have had a reason why they couldn't get close to Rabbit. Thinking about Rabbit choosing not to see her family, the crown prince saying they shouldn't see each other, and the second prince hiding something, Gina knew that this was probably the cliché that was causing the confusion. After asking the quest window to show the level of sympathy towards the crown prince, Gina was pleasantly surprised to see 15% there. Realizing that even though he said they couldn't see each other anymore, and the sympathy was at such a level, she assumed that perhaps their relationship was actually quite good. Her opinion immediately changed when she turned to the side and saw the princess telling him that he seemed to want to lose his hands. When she turned to the princess and said that she couldn't threaten her brother like that, the princess, saying that she hadn't threatened him, clarified that she had simply told the truth. At this point, the crown prince, noting that although he did not accept the words he had heard in passing as truth, said that having seen everything with his own eyes, he simply could not believe it. Jenna shuddered at what she heard, and the guy, saying that she shouldn't be so wary, clarified that he didn't say this to scare her. Noting that he was a little jealous, he picked up the body of the man who had previously claimed to be a priest, and then announced that it was time for his brother to go. Having informed him that he would be busy today, as he needed to get rid of this, he suggested that Louis go. He was quite surprised when his brother, having told him to go first, said that he would catch up with him. Assuming that he was going to monopolize their sister, he said that it seemed that Louis wanted her to call only him brother, in response to which Louis himself said that she did not call him that. He reported that he was already doing this, when the crown prince, noting that he was going to play with Rabbit while he was away, informed him to be prepared for the consequences, and that the training of all members of the knightly order would be on him. When the elder brother began to say that he would now be responsible for both inspecting the underground cave of magic stones and composing a speech for the festival, the second prince, sighing heavily, agreed. Louis said that if he continued, he would do nothing at all when his brother, with a smile on his face, also began talking about taxes. Looking at the departing crown prince, the princess noted that Louis knew how to deal with people, in response to which, he himself clarified that he only knew his brother's weak points well. When Rabbit asked if he would tell her about these weaknesses, the second prince said that he was willing to do so if he could pay. Jenna watched in bewilderment as, in response to the prince's words that there would be one weak spot for every request, the princess, having informed him that he was not a professional, swore on her name that she would fulfill everything. With a stern expression on her face, she immediately refused when the prince informed her that in that case she should call him brother. She noted how shameless it was when her brother, after telling her that she seemed to be the type of person who broke her promises so easily, pointed out that it meant that her promise, which she had made earlier, also had no weight. The princess still agreed, although she was not particularly eager when he asked which of them was the first to break the promise. With a heavy sigh and averted gaze, Rabbit called Louis her brother, causing a blush to appear on the boy's face. Seeing this expression, Gina said that although it might sound presumptuous, his happy face was indeed beautiful. Realizing what she had just said, she loudly asked him not to misunderstand her and explained that she was simply expressing her honest and disinterested impressions and had no personal interest. When Lewis asked her again what she meant by not getting the wrong idea, she said that she had no feelings for him. Jenna apologized, realizing that he might be uncomfortable with such compliments, but he informed her that this was not the case. Noting that he often heard things like that, he looked away and noted that her words weren't unpleasant to him or anything like that. When Gina asked in surprise if this was really the case, the second prince repeated that everything was indeed fine. Looking at them at that moment, and continuing to observe this absurd situation, the princess understood that these two had clearly started on the wrong foot. Turning to her little brother, Rabbit asked why he stayed instead of going after that annoying boy. She asked him to answer this question again, when the second prince reported that this appeal sounded even better than he imagined. After replying that it was all for the sake of treatment, the prince explained that the doctor who would be at her residence had not yet arrived, so they had to go to him at the palace. The princess was pleasantly surprised to hear this, noting that it was an appropriate answer and praised her brother. The princess was amazed beyond measure, and she screamed in horror at what he was doing when he came up to her and lifted her up in his arms. When she asked why he had picked her up, he asked if she was going to walk to his palace. He said that as he knows, she doesn't like it when strangers come here, and it would be faster to go ourselves rather than bring the medicine here, when the sister asked him why he didn't call the person. The princess again wanted to object, but her brother, without even giving her a chance to say anything, said that if she wanted, she could stay here, and he and the lady would go together. Hearing this, the little girl was horrified, and accepting the situation, told him that she was giving him permission and that he should hold her tighter, in response to which Lewis said that he would do it with pleasure. A little while later, when Gina's hand was already bandaged, she, noting that His Highness masterfully ties bandages, thanked him. Noting that she had just said something rude as if nothing had happened, Lewis said that he hoped that she would never again do such things for which she would be grateful. He indicated that this was not the case when the girl, with an awkward laugh, apologized for causing inconvenience. Out of nowhere, Rabbit suddenly announced that the problem was in his speech pattern, and when the guy asked what she meant by that, she told him to just be honest and say that he was worried about Darlene. When the prince said he hadn't said that, the princess noted that his face had turned red, and Darlene, who was watching, was pleasantly surprised and assumed that they looked really close, probably because the sympathy level was completely full. Realizing that it was now time for her to think about what to do earlier, Gina thought about it and realized that there were still two characters left from the main quest, the Tyrant Emperor and the Crown Prince. She knew that no matter how much she thought, even if she could temporarily forget about the hopeless emperor, she definitely needed to gather information about the Crown Prince. Although the Crown Prince appears to be a simpleton who does not care about his little sister, he may actually be a more dangerous person than the emperor himself. Realizing that if she approached him too quickly, nothing good would come of it, Gina, apologizing in advance for interrupting, asked if she could ask a question. When she said that this was not the case, to the prince's question about whether this question was about him, he said that he tries to refrain from talking about personal things, but today he will try to answer, so she cannot worry and ask. He was very surprised when Gina, pleasantly surprised by his words, asked what kind of person His Highness the Crown Prince was. When he asked her in bewilderment what she meant, she said that although it wasn't the first time she had seen him, it was the first time she had spoken to him, so she was interested to know what kind of person he was. Hearing this, the boy said with a frightening look that information about the imperial family was confidential, and even when Gina reminded him of his words that he would answer any question, he repeated it again. At that moment, the fairy announced that the skill of Insight for Good had been launched, and Lady Esta, seeing it, could not understand why this notification had popped up. She cried out in surprise when the princess suddenly asked her if she liked the bratty crown prince. When Rabbit, noting that she was completely confused, asked which of the two princes she liked more, Jenna whispered that they were both wrong. Noting that she shouldn't be embarrassed, Rabbit said with complete confidence that everyone her age goes through this. Having said that there seemed to be a misunderstanding, Gina said that this was not the case, but the princess, ignoring her words, only said that she would be glad if she became a member of her family and asked which of the brothers to give her. A little while later, when Jenna was about to leave, when asked if she would come again, she happily answered that of course she would come. She was very surprised and didn't know what to say when the second prince suddenly announced that he was taking her home. At that moment, there was a loud cry for them to stop, after which the princess, with a grin, told Jenna to leave him and go because they had a serious conversation ahead. After some time, left alone with his sister, Louis asked what she wanted to talk about in the absence of the lady. His surprise knew no bounds when his sister suddenly asked why he had been staring at her subordinate all day. When asked what he planned to do with her Jenna, he shouted that he couldn't do anything with her at all. He said the reason was that he kept thinking about the priest who attacked them when his sister asked him why he was staring at her nanny if he had nothing up his sleeve. Noting that she had not even noticed any sign of his presence, Louis reported that the impostor had gotten into the palace too easily, which led him to believe that such a thing was impossible unless someone from the palace had helped him. When the princess suggested with displeasure that he meant that Jenna had helped him, Louis jumped up from his seat and said that was not what he had meant. After stating that he trusted the lady she trusted since he was her brother, the second prince noted that it was strange that Lady Esta could only be described as a strange person who suddenly appeared and immediately became close to the imperial family. Asking her if she thought other people might have similar thoughts, he gave the example of another person who was with them at the time. At that moment, sitting in the carriage, Jenny was in great surprise when the crown prince, who looked at her through the window with a frightening look, noted that he was very glad to meet her. Having said that he was just about to go to the count's house, the guy asked if she would mind if he pushed her aside a little.